Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more across our country as well as our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a good morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 3,210 new coronavirus deaths and 74,076 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 68,595 cases per day. That's a decrease of 34% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And as of this morning, more than 28,353,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, with more than 505,600 having died from it. More than 150 senior executives from some of the largest American companies across several major industries have lined up behind President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. These companies range from bank and investment firms like Goldman Sachs and Blackstone to technology companies like Google, Intel, and IBM, and airlines, including American and United Airlines. Top executives from real estate, insurance, and utility firms also signed onto the letter. Republican support, to this point at least, has remained non-existent. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has called the plan totally partisan. Biden, over the course of his first month in office, has relentlessly pressed lawmakers to pass his cornerstone legislative proposal, which includes funding for schools, vaccine distribution and infrastructure, states and localities, direct payments, and extensions of expiring unemployment insurance programs. Jamarl, we were talking about this yesterday. For one thing, they're doing budget reconciliation. They have, they can get it through, but it's just weird that they get, it's weird that they have these 150 senior executives coming out to support it. We were sort of tossing around a few theories, tossing around our curiosity yesterday, wondering why they were doing this. Any more thoughts? What do you think?
Well, I think they're trying to create enough pressure to kind of get through what they want to get through. And, I don't know whether that's going to include the $15 an hour minimum wage. It should. But I think they're looking at it as, who do these people listen to? They listen to the wealth of the nation. The wealth of the nation comes out for it. Outside of that, I'm not sure, because I don't know how this plays with the American audience. Like, in fact, I don't think it plays great with the American audience at all, because it makes it look like the party, it makes it look like the base is coming out for the party, and the base being, these senior executives from America's large companies. So that's what it looks like. I don't know I would be very curious to hear what their thinking is on this, because it doesn't seem random. Like, I don't think 150 random executives say, hey, let's get together and send a letter. Maybe, but I'm doubtful. So I'm not entirely sure.
That stuff doesn't organize itself. Like I was saying yesterday, my thought here is it might be trying to create pressure. They might be trying to create pressure on Republicans with this. If you have a bunch of business leaders coming out in support of it, it's harder to criticize it on economic grounds. And it's not perfect, because criticizing the fact that it would cost American taxpayers more money in taxes, or that, the arguments you'd make that it's putting us in debt to our future, that kind of thing. It's putting future generations in debt, which I can bring up as a stock argument. That doesn't exactly relate to businesses, but it kind of does. It's money. And so for the average person, I don't know if the Democrats can respond to Republican criticism by saying, well, hundreds of business leaders, hundreds of the top executives across our country disagree with you guys. They think it's the right call. I think that might be an effective strategy in a limited sense. Back to the headlines, though. On Monday, in North Dakota, a bill was approved to ban requirements for wearing face masks in the state. The bill, which is now on its way to the state Senate, would bar state and local officials, schools, and businesses from mandating masks. The bill's sponsor, State Representative Jeff Hoverson, stated that the measure would only impact government entities. Yet the one-page bill includes a subsection that prohibits making, I'm quoting here, prohibits making use of a face mask, shield, or covering a condition for entry, education, employment, or services, end quote. Matt Gardner, GNDC's legislative director, has stated, quote, our intent is to oppose it in the Senate, end quote. To date, more than 1,400 residents have died of COVID-19 in North Dakota. In national political news, Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska, said Wednesday that she hasn't made a decision on Neera Tanden's nomination. That would be leaving President Biden's pick to lead the Office of Management and Budget in limbo. Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders added that it was, quote, no great secret, end quote, that Tanden didn't currently have the votes to be confirmed. She's come under scrutiny from Republicans concerning previous tweets she made criticizing several senators, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senator Susan Collins, and Murkowski, as well as a long history. What's not brought up here is her long history of criticizing Sanders himself. Right, Jamarl? You know this better than pretty much anybody.
Absolutely. I mean, people keep pointing to the tweets, and the tweets are bad. And we're going to get into this when Garland comes on. But they keep saying the tweets, the tweets, the tweets. And what did Senator Kennedy say? You call Sanders everything but an ignorant slut. Well, that's true. I mean, her tweets have been horrendous, but it's not just the tweets. I mean, she's basically a hatchet woman for the new third way Democrats. And she's been that way for God knows how long. A staunch supporter of Hillary Clinton and willing to put a knife in anybody that gets in the way. Sanders' campaign manager, she apparently hit him when he was working at Center for American Progress when he did this kind of story on Clinton or asked a question about Clinton. And it's her, not just the tweets. Those tweets came out of somebody. So when she said Libya should pay for its own destruction, now, that's as bad as Trump talking about stealing the oil from Iraq, but nobody brings that point up, maybe because she's not president, but she is part of the thought process in the Democratic Party. I mean, the push to cut Social Security, God, man, like, she's not a great person, especially from the standpoint of the left. And so, you know, it's not just the tweets. It's the things that she's represented or pushed for. It's the people that she's backed. It's the things that she was willing to do to back those people. It's all of it. It's all of it. It's not just one thing. So I get people like to focus on the tweets, but the tweets is just one element of it. And I got to be honest, her attacks on Sanders in and of itself would be enough to disqualify her for me because for obvious reasons. I think bad actions have consequences in the political space. And, you know,
but also to disqualify her from any leadership of the progressive movement.
Exactly.
It's weird. Like we're going to be talking about this with Garland later. But you were showing me that around different places, different more establishment left outlets, more democratic outlets have been trying to paint her as a progressive, which seems like gaslighting. I don't know how else to say it. It's like, are you trying to make me crazy? What do you mean? You know, with opposing Sanders, who was the progressive figurehead for at least a couple of years there, at least a year there, and maybe more like 4, depending on how long you held out hopes for him into 2020. You see what I'm saying, Jamarl?
I see exactly what you're saying. And now you have the situation where this, like, establishment media, like you said, is trying to make her seem like a lefty. I mean, they've even had just us Democrats come out, basically acting as if the left is backing this policy. You've even had Democrats come out saying, hey, this is going to be a disappointment for the left. No, it's not. No, it's not. The left was aghast that she was even put in the position in the first place. And I'm telling you, as a representative of the left, this is miraculously funny. It's funny. Neera Tanden wanted this position. Oh, she could taste this position. And she gets up there, and all of the things, all of her sins come back to haunt her with all of these people that she said bad things about over the course of the years, having to talk to her, and basically bitterness coming out. But it's earned bitterness. It's, you know, she's been cantankerous to many of these people over the course of God knows how many years. She has to sit there, docile, and listen to all of these people take shots at her because she wants this position so bad. And at the end of all of that, she still doesn't get it. Ugh.
I hear you.
That's what the left is.
I hear you.
That's what the left is.
We'll come back to this one.
Yeah.
We'll come back to this one with Garland at 8:15, a little bit later on in the show. A new report reveals President Biden and other Democrats received more campaign money from leading border security and immigration prison corporations than Trump during the 2020 election season. According to the report by the Transnational Institute, American Friends Service Committee, and Mi Gente, Biden received over $5 million from border security executive. That's over $3 million more than former President Donald Trump. A former aide to Governor Andrew M. Cuomo, Lindsey Boylan, published an essay on Wednesday accusing the governor of sexual harassment, saying he jokingly suggested a strip poker game and gave her an unwanted kiss. Those are among others unsettling episodes. She states she left her job as a special advisor to the governor shortly after the incident. Ms. Boylan first publicly accused Cuomo of sexual harassment in posts on Twitter in December. Cuomo denied her allegations at the time. She wrote that there are many more of us, but most are too afraid to speak up, quote unquote. Scrutiny on Cuomo's personal conduct came after Ron Kim, a Queens assemblyman, publicly criticized the governor and said that Cuomo had threatened to destroy him. The governor's administration has come under fire in the past couple of weeks for withholding data on coronavirus-related deaths of nursing home residents, which has led federal prosecutors to open an investigation into his misdeeds, into his administration's potential wrongful conduct. And I would argue proven wrongful conduct, but we'll see. Internationally, James Woolsey, who ran the CIA from 1993 to 1995, has made an interesting claim in a new book titled Operation Dragon, co-authored with Lieutenant General Ion Mihai Pacepa, a former acting chief, Nicolae Ceausescu's espionage service. The book claims that Lee Harvey Oswald, who defected to Russia in 1959 and moved back to the U.S. in 1961, was a KGB associate on a mission from Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to kill John F. Kennedy. The book was released February 23rd. Woolsey and Pacepa, who died of COVID-19 on February 14th, based their claim on a new interpretation of the 26-volume Warren Commission report published in 1964. They believe these pieces of evidence prove that John F. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, had a clandestine meeting in Mexico City with his Soviet case officer, Comrade Kostin, who belonged to the KGB's 13th Department for Assassinations abroad. Oswald was shot and killed on November 24th, 2 days after killing President Kennedy. He was killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. I'll be honest, I followed this stuff for a bit, but I haven't read books about it. There are people who are way more knowledgeable than I am. It is known at this point that Oswald was going in between the states and visiting prominent destinations in Mexico City, for instance, with the KGB. But then there are people who think that he was a CIA asset serving as a double agent to get into the KGB and exfiltrate secrets and all this sort of thing. So I'll just put it like this. The fact that he was visiting those places doesn't make it so patently proven. Plus, he was associating with right-wing groups opposing Cuba back in the States. So unless he was like a triple agent or something, it gets confusing. But hopefully we'll come back to this very soon. We're looking to get a guest on tomorrow to talk in a bit more depth about this. The Biden administration is expected to release a declassified U.S. intelligence report today alleging that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the 2018 killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and critic of the Saudi Crown Prince, went into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd, 2018, and was killed by a team of operatives. Riyadh eventually admitted that Khashoggi was killed in a rogue extradition process gone wrong, but it denied any involvement by the Crown Prince. Saudi Crown Prince has admitted that because the murder happened under his ruling that he would take responsibility. The release would represent the latest move by U.S. President Joe Biden to realign ties with Riyadh, apparently realign in a sort of more contradictory, conflict-oriented direction, but we'll see. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki told reporters on Wednesday that Biden would only have communications with the 85-year-old Saudi king and not his son, and said the declassified Khashoggi report was being readied for release. Meanwhile, a statement from the royal court has said Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman underwent a successful surgery to remove his appendix yesterday on Wednesday. In Ecuador, at least 79 inmates have died in riots at 4 prisons across the country. As of Wednesday, 31 people died at that prison in Guayaquil, while 6 others died at another prison in the same city. 34 were reported dead at a prison in a southern city and 8 more in a central city. Videos recorded by inmates and shared on social media showed mutilated bodies in the aftermath of the bloodbath. An investigation into the deadly riots is ongoing, and special units are carrying out operations. In Armenia, opposition political party Prosperous Armenia supported the demand for Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's resignation and called on the head of the government to step down immediately. A statement was issued. That statement said, quote, "The The statement of the armed forces and the general staff calling for standing side by side with the people and the statehood is a game changer. We call on Nikol Pashinyan not to go toward a civil war, not to shed Armenian blood inside the country, not to sow discord among Armenians. Nikol Pashinyan has the last chance to step down politically with no shocks, end quote. This comes before Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan then fired the head of the country's armed services, broadcasting that decision live after accusing the military of an attempted coup before marching in the streets with his supporters. Got a few more headlines I want to get to. In tech news, William J. Burns, a veteran diplomat tapped to be the next CIA director, says he will follow through with the agency's plans to adopt artificial intelligence technology to counter the activities of Chinese spies. Mr. Burns, who appeared at a confirmation hearing before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence on Wednesday, has claimed China is spending greatly in AI and also artificial intelligence innovation to reinforce its knowledge, and also counterintelligence abilities. A written statement from Mr. Burns reads that, quote, the CIA must meet this challenge by transforming how it collects, analyzes, and disseminates intelligence, end quote. In Facebook news, Facebook said on Wednesday that it had banned Myanmar's military from its platforms. The move also barred military-owned businesses in Myanmar from advertising on Facebook. Since the coup earlier this month, which ousted leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, the military has repeatedly shut off the internet and cut access to major social media sites. Facebook became central to day-to-day life in Myanmar after the general public began gaining access to the internet about a decade ago. Over time, Facebook has become increasingly willing to act against what is posted on its platform, especially over the past year in connection with the U.S. election and U.S.-based social media movements, like, for instance, the QAnon conspiracy theory, against which Facebook cracked down pretty harshly. Last month, Facebook barred then-President Donald J. Trump from using the service. And in 2018, Facebook banned General Min Aung Hlaing from its site, head of Myanmar's military, because of his links to human rights violations and social media manipulation. In Indian Facebook news, the Indian government has announced new rules to regulate tech companies, with social media firms like Facebook and Twitter and entertainment companies such as Netflix facing new restrictions that would require them to respond to grievances of the Indian government. This move is partly spurred by Facebook's refusal to drop content on the farmers' protest in the country. A lot more to talk about here, but we need to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute on the other side of this break with our soapbox segment, Jamarl's monologue, and a short conversation about that monologue. Be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
Great job. Even better. Let's get one more, just to be sure.
Are you a young photographer the world needs to know? Bring your images to more eyes through the Andre Stenin contest. Open to both artists and photojournalists, there are dozens of categories to enter and compete for a share of serious prize money. And, more importantly, international recognition of your work. Learn more about how to enter at stenincontest.com. Point, shoot, win. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. Also, make sure you are subscribed. Sometimes platforms do strange things. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. All right, the headlines went a bit long today, so let's kind of blow through this as fast as possible. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia. Now, I saw this story this morning at around 2 in the morning, and I set up writing a headline that eventually ended up being a monologue. So I will just read basically what I wrote. President Biden is due to have his first call with Saudi Arabia's King Salman ahead of the release of the declassified U.S. intelligence report on the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. The important point here, and I just point, quote, Biden administration will release an intelligence report Thursday that concludes the Saudi prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the 2018 killing of journalist Jamarl Khashoggi. 3 U.S. officials familiar with the matter said, this is a big deal. It doesn't sound like much because it's just a little paragraph, but that paragraph is saying an extraordinarily high amount of information. The White House chief propagandist and secretary, Jen Psaki, basically told reporters Wednesday that Biden will communicate with the Saudi king rather than the son, the crown prince. She said that the declassified report was being prepared for release. Now, that's a major detail that is going to be taken by Saudi Arabia, by MBS, and by the world as a reprimand, and a reprimand scolding by the United States. On one hand, Biden seems to be deprioritizing the relationship with Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, in a significant reversal to Trump's sycophancy, Biden is directing the United States to acknowledge leadership away from the son, meaning Crown Prince MBS, but to his father, who is still technically king, despite it being widely believed that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, for those he's not torturing, crucifying, imprisoning for offenses like driving, indiscriminately murdering with American-made weapons, or hacked to death by a bugged embassy with a surgical bone saw. He is MBS to those people who you would probably consider friends. To everybody else, probably not so much. This is like a reverse Juan Guaido, where instead of the United States pretending that the guy calling for a murderous, blood-soaked putsch is the leader of a country, Biden is basically acknowledging the technical king and putting his attention to the technical king and basically acknowledging that king as leader, while at the same token slighting the guy who supposedly is leader, or at the very least is being given credit to do so. This is fascinating politics and will show the extent or degradation of United States soft power in Saudi Arabia's internal affairs. Considering Saudi Arabia was built and maintained as a direct result of U.S. weapons and protection, acknowledgement and communication to the king confers a diminishment of MBS from the United States point of view, and by extension, diminishment on the world's stage. This is a big deal. Note, this is not necessarily a diminishment of Saudi Arabia from the United States or Europe's perspective, as the EU is still desperate for its need of oil. And despite the United States being an oil exporting nation, we are also in need of that oil. Oil is not a drug we cowboy up and go cold turkey on. But with the telegraphed technological shift to fuel cells, to electric cars, and to and the necessary infrastructure that Biden seems to be willing to invest, the priority of this relationship degrades proportional to the need for that resource. Meaning, the less that we need oil, and the more ways we can come up with ways to avoid using oil, the less we need from Saudi Arabia. It's a deprioritization of that relationship, not because of the things, or just because of the things that he were doing, but also because of the plans and the policies and I strongly suspect, the bills, the infrastructure policies that Joe Biden is going along with. He is going to try to expand solar. And if he's going to try to expand solar, he's going to up the infrastructure for it and everything else. He doesn't want to have to deal with Saudi Arabia, especially if he doesn't have to. And that's what this is about. There is no magic here. The United States-Saudi relationship is like all other foreign policy relationships between legal fictions. It's a relationship of convenience that for a while now hasn't been all that convenient. The deboning of Khashoggi is just the most visible of these issues. The propagation of terrorists throughout the region, something that even Clinton noted in her emails. The use of starvation and disease as intentional uses of war instead of incidental happenings of war. The indiscriminate bombing, not to mention the violent repression of its population under the religious extremists, mob boss style dictatorship. My suggestion would be to keep your attention, at least in part, here. The scolding wrapped in a political message that Joe Biden said could mean a certain amount of destabilization at the top if MBS goes on a kill/imprisonment spree to maintain control in spite of the U.S. president that finds him lacking as a credible partner in controlling the region. This is kind of my point why it's a big deal. MBS is basically is a de facto leader, supposedly ran that country. Trump loved the guy and was basically a sycophant to the guy. Biden gets in and has great qualms with the way Trump engaged him, I would imagine, in one sense, but also great qualms in the things that he was doing either in Yemen, the killing of Khashoggi. All of these things are problematic from the image of the United States. How does it look, us screaming about freedom and democracy while we have a partner that basically deboned somebody in an embassy, chopped them up with a bone saw, I should say, in an embassy? How do we say we're the indispensable partner around the world, that we believe in freedom and justice, when these guys are out here throwing women in prison for the temerity to drive? I'm making the point that this argument that often comes up with Iran fits Saudi Arabia that much better. How do we take this position in the world when you have a partner like Saudi Arabia? That's kind of what I'm getting at here. This has not been a partnership. This has been a partnership of convenience, and that convenience is wearing thin. The question is, what happens now? What happens internally to Saudi Arabia? For that matter, what does it mean between the relationship between Washington and Riyadh? In one case, if MBS is deposed by another ruler or by another leader in that country, because basically, if you're not friends with us, maybe that country says the U.S. partnership is more important than MBS being here. And enemies of MBS may take that chance. The fact that Joe Biden is having a conversation with the king in and of itself is you sit down and let the adults talk. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating on the world stage. What happens? For that matter, what is the relationship if MBS doesn't leave? What happens if Joe Biden can't push him out? What happens? This is fascinating politics. This relationship between oil and protection has gone back for the last, 70 years? Some ungodly amount of time. And now it seems like it's hitting the skids. This could be a reorganization of U.S. interests, especially in that region of the world, especially with oil going out of popularity into things like fuel cells, or for that matter, electricity. Shane, what do you think? I think this could be very destabilizing to Saudi Arabia. Depends on how far and how hard Joe Biden is willing to push it. But if this acknowledgement or deprioritization of MBS, and this talking to his dad with the idea that maybe you need to choose somebody else, this could be a big deal. And this could turn bloody depending on how far these guys are willing to go with it in order to maintain power. What do you think, Shane?
Mohammed bin Salman is not just known as the power behind the throne. As far as I can tell, he is also his father's favorite son. And therefore, his dad will probably play along with this, but I think he is still heavily leaning on Mohammed bin Salman as the heir apparent. I think he's going to keep that going. Mohammed bin Salman, as far as I can tell, unless he's a figurehead for this process, has been the main political leader in Saudi Arabia, pushing for, among other things, along with torture and widespread allegations of human rights abuses, of human rights activists, those kinds of things. He's also pushing for NEOM and Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. Basically, he's pushing to modernize Saudi Arabia in various ways, both socially and politically, as well as economically, moving them away from their, complete dependence on oil exports and sales. So if that vision makes sense, as other nations have produced more oil, and as the world as a whole, as you're talking about, at least in theory, is moving away from oil, Saudi Arabia should try to modernize as a nation. They should try to shift away. And if they're going to go into one sector, high tech stuff would make sense with his push for NEOM. But who knows? Maybe he's facing serious opposition at home to that idea. Certainly, with some of the political reforms he's done, the social reforms, he would face some pushback from the more religious conservative hardliners on this stuff. And I can only say so much as an outside observer. But my guess is he overstepped with the Khashoggi killing. That doesn't mean, however, that he's kaput. And Biden signaling that he wants to talk to his father might not mean that much in the long run if his father dies and Mohammed bin Salman takes over. But we'll see what happens. I'll hand it back to you to close this out. What do you think, Jamarl?
No, I think that's a good point. Look, it's unknown. What I would say, though, is that conversation with Biden, look, he went to the dad. And I don't think that's happened. I don't think that's an accident. I guess the question becomes, Look, that plan for Saudi Arabia could be done by somebody else. It doesn't necessarily have to be him. He's not the only person with ideas. I guess the question becomes, what is this conversation about? That's basically the question. And if that report comes out that he did it, and Joe Biden is having a conversation with the dad, it's possible that this conversation with the dad is like, look, you need to get your house in order. So we'll see. I mean, it's very interesting. That's all I'm saying. Keep your attention on that and see what goes on with that situation, because that could be greatly destabilizing to Saudi Arabia, meaning the upper echelon, if it does get to this thing of a shakeup. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I suppose that's the soapbox segment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming up, somebody I am greatly interested to talk to, Chris Williamson. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Yesterday, we reported on a story that is actually quite big, and yet I haven't necessarily been seeing this in mainstream media, even though, again, it is somewhat of a bombshell. Gray Zone reported leaks, two of which, or multiple leaks. Now, these leaks point to the BBC and Reuters being basically propaganda outlets, or at the very least working on behalf of a British organization. The leaks illustrate in an alarming detail how Reuters and the BBC, two of the largest and most distinguished news organizations in the world, attempted to answer the British Foreign Ministry's call for help in improving its, quote, ability to respond and to promote our message across Russia, unquote, and to counter the Russian government's narrative. Among the UK's FCO stated goals, according to the director of the CBMD, it was to weaken the Russian state influence on its neighbors. This goes further than that. Apparently, right here, Reuters and BBC solicited multi-million-dollar contracts to advance the British state's interventionist aims, promising to cultivate the Russian journalists through FCO's funding tours and training sessions, establish influence networks in and around Russia, and to promote NATO narratives in Russian-speaking regions. This is basically to undermine Russia. Right here, in several proposals to the British Foreign Office, Reuters boasted a global influence network of 15,000 journalists and staff, including 400 inside Russia. And here's another one. This is the Gray Zone article, by the way. The UK's FCO projects were carried out covertly and in partnership with purportedly independent, high-profile online media outfits, including Bellingcat, Medusa, and the P-Riot-founded Medozina. Bellingcat's participation apparently included a UK FCO intervention into North Macedonia's 29 elections on behalf of the pro-NATO candidate. This is actually a pretty profound story, even going into the idea that these guys were pushing basically color revolutionary type positions in these various countries. Now, Reuters and the BBC deny the reporting on this, but the leaks are pretty clear. Speaking with us on this particular topic is a British politician who proudly served as Member of Parliament for Derby North in 2010 to 2015 and 2017 to 2019. Since leaving Parliament, he has founded the Resist Movement for a Political Party, or for People's Party, and the Left's Legal Fighting Fund. The person I'm talking to is former UK Parliament, Chris Williamson. Chris, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, Chris, this story is profound. I mean, the leaks themselves are amazing. And this Gray Zone article is really on point. It even makes the point that they were training. It said through training programs of Russian journalists overseen by Reuters, the British Foreign Office sought to produce an attitudinal change in participants, quote unquote, promoting a positive impact on their perception of the UK. This is amazing. I mean, basically, the BBC and Reuters are getting money from an office in Britain. And the goal of this is to basically change the perspective of Russians or people who are in these areas on Russia and the Russian government. This is astonishing. Reuters, of course, is saying that's not what this is, but the leaks are pretty straightforward. Chris, what do you have to think about this? Give us some framing of this to understand how Reuters and the BBC could be wrapped up into such information peddling act.
Nothing new, of course. And what, to me, it smacks of is rank hypocrisy, because we hear a lot of propaganda in the British corporate media and indeed amongst the political class on both sides of the parliamentary chamber, the House of Commons, and indeed the House of Lords for that matter, about Russian influence and, Russia's being portrayed as a sort of a bogeyman. And I think it's all about trying to justify increases in so-called defense spending. That has a huge benefit to the military-industrial complex. There's huge profits to be made out of manufacturing weapons of war. But this is nothing new. The Reuters, according to classified documents that were released, I think it was in January last year, confirmed that Reuters had been involved in anti-Soviet propaganda in the 60s and the 1970s. And I believe that at the time when that information was made available last year, Reuters said that it was not in keeping with the trust principles and that they wouldn't do this today. And yet we know from this information that was revealed in the Grey Zone article last week, I think it was, that that's precisely what they're doing today. They are very clearly seeking to influence the media agenda in Russia, and they're quite open in terms of some of the documentation that I've seen, where they're saying that it's all about seeking to influence or weaken Russia's influence on its near neighbours and to promote a pro-Western news agenda in Russia itself. So for me, it's the hypocrisy that gets me. The way in which, as I've already said, the corporate media and the political class continually, talk about how they sort of describe it, the pernicious influence of Russia, when in truth they're doing far worse than anything they've actually today, far worse than anything that they've accused the Russians of actually doing.
Well, and it's also, like you brought up, hypocrisy on multiple grounds there. You also have, of course, Reuters, known sort of along with the AP Press, along with AP News, as a primary source for other news outlets, trusted on its supposed lack of bias, which is, again, doing one thing and saying another. So it's hypocrisy across the board. In that Grey Zone article that you referenced, they did the research, they published this stuff. They quote you fairly early on. You had previously worked to try to reveal information on the Counter-Disinformation and Media Development Department, also on the Integrity Initiative in the UK. Can you go back into that? What did you do there? This was years ago at this point, but not too long ago. What was your relationship there, Chris?
Well, it came to my attention following the publication of a substantial amount of documentation that had been hacked by an activist organization called Anonymous, and they put that onto the internet. And it related to the activities of a so-called charity called the Institute for Statecraft. And one of their projects was the Integrity Initiative. And the Integrity Initiative was apparently about countering so-called Russian disinformation. And I started asking questions because in the documents that were revealed, it showed that the organization, the Integrity Initiative, had been smearing Jeremy Corbyn, who was the leader of the official opposition at the time, leader of the Labour Party, and Labour under Jeremy's leadership were looking to really challenge the status quo, to challenge the sort of imperialist foreign policy agenda, and to implement a modest socialist program at home. And that was unconscionable to so many powerful vested interests, and they were doing everything in their power to smear and undermine him. And it came to, as I say, my attention following the publication of these documents that this organisation, the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft, were heavily involved in that process. And so I started asking questions, because it was asserted that they were actually supported by, financially, the British government. So I started asking questions in the House of Commons about, what precisely the government were doing. So I put down questions for the various departments to determine how much money had been made available. And it was as a result of that process revealed that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office had given the Integrity Initiative in excess of £2 million, and the Ministry of Defence had also given, I think it was around £250,000 in the preceding 18 months alone. And to me, it struck echoes with the Operation Mockingbird, which was a CIA-sponsored program that was started in the 1950s in the US at the height of the Cold War, really, to promote the kind of US government's position in relation to standing up to communism, as they put it, and to infiltrate the civil rights movement and the student movement at the time, and to ensure that there was placing supportive stories in the media that complied with the prevailing administration. The Democrats, and there were not a great deal of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, but I mean, the prevailing sort of official government line, as it were. And they had quite a lot of prominent journalists on their payroll. Now, if we go fast forward to the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft, they sort of seem to be kind of using the Operation Mockingbird playbook, because they also have a number of assets, as it were, that they use in the media and indeed in academia too, to promote a line, and not just in the UK, but really across the world. And there was an interesting example where a guy called Pedro Baños, who was a senior figure in Spain in the Socialist Party, and he was a preferred candidate. He'd been a distinguished military career, and he was a preferred candidate to take over, I think it was their Homeland Security. And he'd made some fairly softball commentary about his view in relation to Russia. And he was, making, I think, a kind of common sense remark in relation to Russia not particularly posing any real threat to the national interests of Spain. And as a consequence of that, the Integrity Initiative mobilized its Spanish cluster, as they referred to them, to really basically demonize Pedro Baños, and to put lots of stories out in through social media, but also to place stories in the Spanish media. And anyway, the upshot of all that was that the front runner, Pedro Baños, was dropped as a candidate, so he didn't actually get the role that he was lined up to take on. And I was asking questions: why was it that an organisation, a so-called charity funded by the British state, was interfering in the democratic affairs of a fellow European neighbouring country, an ally of the UK, and didn't get anywhere in terms of any meaningful responses from ministers? I mean, I got the information relating to how much funds had been paid over, but when I started to probe further, they clammed up and said, the interest of national security, the effectiveness of the program, they couldn't reveal any further information. So I went to try to find out a little bit more directly from the Institute for Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative by visiting their premises. And I was due to speak at a public meeting in Dundee, and the registered office for the Institute for Statecraft is in a small village called Oktamochi, I think it's about 5 or 6 miles outside of Dundee. So I went to try and find this place and speak to, hopefully, some of the individuals there directly. But when I arrived at the official address, it turned out to be a semi-derelict mill at the end of a sort of half-mile dirt track. So clearly there was nobody there. And then I made a few days later, a week or so later, went to their registered London office and spoke to one of the founders of the Institute for Statecraft, called Lafayette. And when I knocked on the door and asked if he was available, he eventually came to the door. And when I started to ask him some questions, he immediately slammed the door in my face when I said I was Chris Williamson, MP for Derby North, and I'd like to ask some questions about, your activities as far as the Institute for Statecraft is concerned and the Integrity Initiative. And, he just sort of clammed up. I was calling then for a public inquiry, but unfortunately there was then other factors that came into play, and there was moves against me to make all sorts of appalling accusations that I was, well, they weren't exactly accusing me of anti-Semitism directly. They were saying I was. I think the term they used was a Jew baiter, an appalling calumny that they were throwing out. I mean, the problem is that anti-Semitism had been weaponized by the Zionist lobby and obviously by people who found it a convenient stick to beat the Labour leader with, because he was a very strong.
Let's come back on that.
Let's come back to that. I mean, those were disgusting charges.
We should come back to
that didn't line up to reality at all, either against you or against Corbyn. And it seemed they went after you because you were willing to stand up and say these charges were bogus. That's a good point to come back on. The voice that you guys are listening to is Chris Williamson. He's a British politician who proudly served as Member of Parliament for Derby North from 2010 to 2015 and from 2017 to 2019. Since leaving Parliament, he's founded the Resist Movement for a People's Party and the Left Legal Fighting Fund. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment. It's Chris Williamson.
Fault lines. What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Continuing to join us is Chris Williamson, British politician who proudly served as Member of Parliament for Derby North from 2010 to 2015 and from 2017 to 2019. Since leaving Parliament, he has founded the Resist Movement for a People's Party and the Left Legal Fighting Fund. And again, Chris, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. So,
yeah, thanks for inviting us on.
Absolutely. So we were getting into, we're discussing the BBC and Reuters basically accepting payment from shadowy organizations within the context of the British government. And by the way, this wasn't just recent. Apparently, the documents showed that this went all the way back to the 60s. And like you say, it does put you in mind of Operation Mockingbird, shadowy department within the UK's FCO, known as the Counter-Disinformation and Media Development. The media organization operated alongside a collection of intelligence contractors in a secret entity known as the Consortium. Now, this went so far as to go beyond the borders of the UK, and I think that's the wild part, the reach, the number of news organizations that are playing themselves as straight news, as independent news, and you have this kind of insidious factor of framing that this is an independent news media, when really you have thousands of people that are basically on the take and are being guided in regards to the way that they should look at the world and look at stories. This was definitely the case in the UK. And honestly, when we were talking about this notion of the anti-Semitism charges that were being used. That the anti-Semitism charge in the UK was astonishing to me. There was nothing to show for it. There was nothing they could pin either you or Jeremy Corbyn on in saying anything else, with the exception of Palestinians are human beings. How dare you say such a thing? It's astonishing and utterly appalling. And the thing that I loved about you was you were willing to say it. You were willing to stand up and say, this is appalling. You guys are using this for weapons or as political weaponry, etc. And you were attacked for that. And the wild part is Corbyn came under the same assault. Now, the difference is Corbyn wouldn't say what you said. He wouldn't go as far as to say this is bogus, you guys are using this for political effect, etc. And he ended up being taken down basically by the same attack And he never spoke up on this. So from your vantage point and from the way UK politics is formed, why is that attack so particularly devastating in the UK? Because that attack is used in the United States, but it doesn't seem to have the same level of, gravity associated with it, especially when there's nothing that these guys have to show for it.
No, I mean, it's been under the surface for some time. I mean, there was a strong move against Ed Miliband, who, could hardly be described as a socialist when he was the leader of the Labour Party prior to Jeremy taking over, Jeremy Corbyn in 2015. And when Ed Miliband agreed and whipped the Labour MPs to support a motion in the House of Commons to recognise the Palestinian state, that resulted in a fevered attack against him in the in the Jewish Chronicle and the various Jewish media outlets, which are essentially pro-Zionist media outlets, and of course it was sort of the accusation of anti-Semitism was beginning to rear its head even then. But not on the scale that it did when Jeremy Corbyn was elected, because Jeremy had a long record of supporting the Palestinian cause, calling out the abuses of the Israeli state, their transgressions of international law, and so on. And he was seen as a much more of a serious threat because he was somebody who was talking about a very strong anti-imperialist foreign policy that would have had a significant impact on the military-industrial complex. And so you've got this almost perfect storm, really, where the Zionist lobby and those behind the military-industrial complex, those who essentially wanted to sustain the neoliberal economic status quo in the country, joined forces essentially to attack Jeremy Corbyn, and all manner of accusations were thrown against him. But the one that seemed to gain traction was the anti-Semitism one. And I think the main reason for that, I know the main reason for that was Jeremy's unwillingness to defend his own reputation and defend the Labour Party's reputation. And I wasn't prepared to do that. And I supported Jeremy and said the attacks against him were outrageous, that the attacks and indeed the way in which the bureaucrats within the Labour Party who were working against Jeremy Corbyn as well, ironically, were using this as a weapon against socialists and pro-Palestinian socialists inside the Labour Party. And ironically, many of the early victims of the witch hunt were themselves Jewish, anti-Zionist Jews. I mean, there's one guy, Cyril Chilson, for example, who is an Oxford Don, was born in Israel. His wife was similarly born in Israel. Both of them served in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. He is both he and his partner are strong pro-Palestinian activists now. His parents both survived Auschwitz, and he was expelled from the Labour Party after a grotesque smear campaign that he was an anti-Semite. His wife was similarly suspended from the party on those same allegations. And various others, Tony Greenstein, another long-standing pro-Palestinian activist who was the son of a rabbi whose father fought the fascists, the Oswald Mosley's fascists, in the so-called Battle of Cable Street in the 1930s in the UK. Jackie Walker, a prominent black Jewish activist who was the vice chair of Momentum, which was a pressure group established after Jeremy Corbyn had been elected as leader to support his leadership. Yeah. And so it went. And I was not prepared to just sort of stand back and allow these completely false accusations to be made. And I therefore stood up and called them out and defended those people. And because I was defending people that had been accused, I was then accused of myself of, as it were, enabling anti-Semitism, and was referred to as a Jew baiter. Yeah. Disgraceful. I mean, I'll spend my life fighting racism, and to be accused of that is a terrible thing. But I think the reason why it's gained so much traction is the leadership's unwillingness to defend their reputation. They kept giving ground. They kept apologising. I said to them, and I said to the so-called socialist campaign group inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, that we have to draw a line in the sand and stop backing down, because every concession that you make, you're just feeding the beast and making it stronger.
Run,
and they'll just keep coming back for more. And ultimately, they will topple Jeremy Corbyn and smash the socialist project that we're seeking to build here.
And that's what they did.
They never listened.
Yeah.
I was then suspended.
Chris.
I was then prevented from standing in the election as a Labour candidate. And now they've gone for Jeremy Corbyn, and he's been suspended, and he's on course to be expelled from the party as well.
And Chris, that's kind of what I want to get to, because you're right. They, George Galloway used to say, if they run, they're going to chase you. And that's basically what happened. Jeremy Corbyn, every time they gave ground, it almost as if he was legitimizing their argument, despite the fact that the argument didn't have any legitimacy. It's not that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. Yeah, it's like sexism, racism, of course it exists. The question becomes, was it existing in that context? And the answer is it wasn't. Like, what's the woman named Hodge, screaming that he's an effing anti-Semite on the floor of Parliament? I mean, that stuff was utterly disgusting that was taking place. And right here, Jeremy Corbyn gets suspended. Leader of the opposition at one point, only a few months after he's leader, gets suspended. And on top of that, you have Starmer, who I would argue is probably more responsible for Jeremy Corbyn being in that weird position of being a Brexiteer himself and yet not being able to say anything about Brexit. Starmer basically doesn't allow him back into the party, meaning the suspension gets revoked, but it doesn't allow him back as whip. And so you have this kind of weird situation where the left wing of the Labour Party is basically sheared off. Where does that go? I mean, it's there's a few parts with this, right? Hancock, or the Tories, are basically caught in a scandal, big scandal. Boris doesn't seem to be all that adversely affected by it. Starmer doesn't seem to be able to put any kind of, real opposition to Boris Johnson. And the left wing of the Labour Party, with the Jeremy Corbyn and yourself, have basically been sheared away. What happens to Labour from here? Where does the UK go? But more appropriate, where does Labour go in this situation?
Well, I don't think there's a future for the Labour Party, and I regret to say that, because I spent 44 years of my life fighting for the Labour Party, and I was a dedicated activist right from 1976, campaigned in every single election from 1977, that's local elections, general elections for Parliament and the European elections, and campaigned in between elections too. I gave my life to the Labour Party, and I was sacrificed, thrown on the scrap heap, as it were, by the party. Same thing has happened to Jeremy Corbyn, Ken Livingstone, former mayor of London, one of probably the most effective anti-racist campaigner this country's ever produced, actually, in his role as leader of the Greater London Council in the early 1980s. He moved the cause of anti-racism forward probably more than any other individual, and yet he's been accused of being an anti-Semite and has been suspended, and he eventually resigned from the Labour Party, as I did. Frankly, I don't think there's a future for the party. Jeremy's in a sort of twilight zone now where he was suspended by the party, then reinstated. But like you say, Keir Starmer refused to restore the Labour whip. So he's a Labour member of Parliament who isn't a Labour member of Parliament, if you know what I mean. So he's a Labour Party member and an MP, but not officially a Labour MP. I mean, it's an absurd state of affairs. And I think ultimately Corbyn is on course to be expelled. I don't think Starmer will have him back at any price. Where does that leave the Labour Party? Well, the Labour Party is essentially a establishment party. Maybe it always has been, if we're honest about it. I suppose, convinced myself that one day, if we could secure enough members of the party and maybe get a left leader, that we could actually use that party as a vehicle to transform the country. And many of the progressive changes, well, all the progressive changes actually that brought in since the Second World War have been delivered by Labour government.
Chris, I'm going to have to end it here just because we're coming up to the hour. But I really appreciate this interview, and you can come back anytime. Thank you for joining us. The voice that you guys were listening to is a British politician who proudly served as member of Parliament for Derby North from 2010 to 2015 and 2017 to 2019. Since leaving Parliament, he has founded the Resist Movement for People's Party and the Left Legal Fighting Fund. You guys can follow Chris Williamson on Twitter at DerbyChrisW and on his website, resistfest.com, UK. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And that would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, at least 3,210 new coronavirus deaths and 74,076 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 68,595 cases per day. That is a decrease of 34% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 28,353,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and more than 505,600 have died. That number, 3,200, is much higher. It seems, look, to be fair, I think the same rules apply. This number tends to go up as the course of the week wears on, and then tends to go down at the first of the week. I suppose the only way we can really look at the numbers an average of the week to get somewhat of an accurate representation. More than 150 senior executives from one of the largest companies from the largest American companies across several major industries have lined up behind President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. These companies range from bank and investment firms like Goldman Sachs and Blackstone to technology companies like Google, Intel, IBM, and airlines including American and United. Top executives from real estate, insurance, and utility firms also signed on to the letter. Republican support for this point, at least, has remained non-existent. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has called the plan totally partisan. Biden, over the course of the first month in office, has relentlessly pressed lawmakers to pass his cornerstone legislative proposal, which includes funding for schools, vaccine distribution, infrastructure, state and localities, direct payments, and extension of an expiring unemployment insurance program. Look, this also at one point included Joe Biden's $15 an hour minimum wage. Now, he's been telling people behind the scenes that he doesn't necessarily believe it's going to happen. He's basically dogging his own plan and putting up a trial balloon for failure. It also needs to be understood that if Joe Biden acquiesced and worked with whatever Republicans came up with, it is very likely, I would say possible, but I would say more likely than not, that whatever they give him will be insufficient, with the idea that the plan that is insufficient loses in 2 years because it was insufficient. That would also be coupled with the bonus of McConnell and Republicans saying, you acted totally partisan, even if he acquiesces to their demands. Joe Biden gets nothing out of acquiescing to the demands of Republicans. And bipartisanship is not the point. And I've said this before. The goal and the point of the president is to deliver for the American public. That's it. No more, no less. If Republicans join along with that, great. If they don't, then your responsibility at that point is to say they're standing in the way of America and find one bully pulpit after the next, every mic that you can get in front of, scream at the height of your lungs that these guys are standing in the way of America. These guys are stopping me from getting America's agenda done. These guys are stopping your wages from going up. And hanging that around their necks for the next 2 years. That's what you do. That's how you get that passed. And when they say it was a partisan proposal, says, yes, I delivered for the American public while they stood there and didn't want to do it. That's politics. That's what you do. You don't go begging, beseeching. You go and you try to force that through. And by the way, you got 51 votes. Kamala Harris is a tiebreaker. This plan can be entirely done just with Democrats. So if this doesn't get done, you have one place to point, and it is not Republicans. On Monday in North Dakota, a bill was approved to ban requirements for wearing masks in the state. The bill, now on its way to state Senate, would bar state and local officials, school, and businesses from mandating masks. The bill's sponsor, State Representative Jeff Hoverson, stated that the measure would only impact government entities. Yet, the one-page bill includes a subsection that prohibits making the use of face mask, shield, or covering a condition for entry, education, employment, or services, unquote. Matt Gardner, GNDC's legislative director, has stated, quote, our intent is to pose it in the Senate, unquote. To date, more than 1,400 residents have died of COVID-19 in North Dakota. That's amazing. I can't believe, wow, that's amazing. 3,000 people died, and these guys are still complaining about the mask. Lisa Murkowski, Republican in Alaska, said Wednesday that she hasn't made a decision on Neera Tanden's nomination, leaving President's pick to lead the Office of Management and Budget in limbo as two Senate panels postponed the votes on Neera Tanden. Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders added that, quote, it was no great secret, unquote, that Tanden didn't currently have the votes to be confirmed. Tanden has come under scrutiny from Republicans concerning previous tweets that she made criticizing several senators, including Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, Murkowski. To uphold her nomination, the White House needs to pick up at least one GOP senator. This includes, by the way, Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat in name, who basically say, yeah, I can't vote for her, and which means she doesn't have the votes. Now, I don't know if Manchin is just waiting for something. I heard that she had said some pretty bad things about the daughter, or there was something going on with his daughter involving Neera Tanden. Either way, she doesn't seem to have the votes. And I, personally, am a happy man that she doesn't. I don't care if Joe Biden puts somebody in that's worse. Don't care one iota. I don't know what that means in real terms. I would imagine there could be some intangible quality of differential between him, and her, and somebody else. But that differential doesn't overwhelm my want to see her fail. And if I'm being bluntly honest, the want of lefties in general. We'll talk to Garland about that one. That should be a good conversation. A new report reveals President Biden and other Democrats received more campaign money from leading border security and immigration prison corporations than Donald Trump did in 2020 election season. According to the report by the Transnational Institute, America Friends Service Committee, and Magente, Biden received over $5 million from border security executives, over $3 million more than former President Donald Trump. Shane, what do you think about that? I will put to you that the reason they probably gave that money because they knew Trump was going to lose. Meaning, if you're doing an evaluation of who do I think is going to win this race, all right, I'm going to give that person the most because I want that much influence. By the same token, in case I'm wrong, I would still stick money into this other guy's pocket because that guy is not going to know that I stuck money into this other person's pocket, at least in the short term. That's the way I think about this, and I think companies do it in general, where they say, I'm going to give this guy a certain amount, but I'm also going to give this guy a certain amount because I want influence in both. The most you give to is the one that you think have the better chance of winning. And apparently, they thought Biden had the better chance of winning. What do you think? Well, let's do this. We'll come back to that one. Because that one is that one is pretty wild. This is a story that I found to be pretty mind-blowing. And I think when I was talking about this last night with the team, I was like, they are going after him. They're trying to take his head off. And this is one of those things where everything that they have on him is being leveled against them. Of course, I am talking about Andrew Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, who has basically been under assault over the last several weeks for the things that he did in that office, including spiking the football and dancing in the end zone at the exact same time where he was hiding the deaths of the number of people who were dying in those nursing homes. A former aide to Governor Andrew Cuomo, Lindsey Bolin, published an essay on Wednesday accusing the governor of sexual harassment, saying he jokingly suggested a strip poker game and gave her an unwanted kiss, among other unsettling episodes. She states that she left her job as special advisor to the governor shortly after the incident. Mrs. Bolin first publicly accused Cuomo of sexual harassment and posted on Twitter in December. Cuomo denied her allegations at the time. Quote, there are many more of us, she wrote, but most are afraid to speak up, unquote. Scrutiny on Cuomo's personal conduct came after Ron Kim, a Queens Assemblyman, publicly criticized the governor, saying that Cuomo had threatened to quote-unquote destroy him. The governor administration is under fire for withholding data on the coronavirus-related deaths of nursing home residents, which has led federal prosecutors to open an investigation. The Kim case is interesting because Cuomo made comments basically screaming at him on the phone, I think for 15 minutes. He starts off, "Are you an honorable man?" And when Kim answers the question, he flips out, screams at him. Kim apparently says his wife was shaken by the episode and comes out and attacks Kim on this kind of money he was getting from nail companies or something, acting as if the guy was somehow corrupt. Yeah, this was Cuomo's way of trying to destroy the guy. Now the catch is, if he's that way with Kim, he's probably that way with everybody he interacts with from the standpoint of government, with the strongman persona. Well, it seems now that the strongman, everybody has found a weakness, and one weakness after the next. They're going after him, whether it's the nursing home and the resident deaths, him receiving the Emmy while those deaths were on his conscience, him making the comment talking about sleep well at night, again, within the context of having all of these people that have been dying that he's basically been hiding the deaths on. When it came out that he was basically, they froze when Donald Trump was looking at his administration, and he was concerned that there would be a federal investigation into New York. Their concern was they're going to use whatever we give them against us. And that administration froze. And the question becomes, what does Joe Biden do? What do the Democrats in New York do? And is this enough to either impeach Cuomo or at the very least have an investigation into the affairs and the events that took place? I don't think all of this information is coming out for naught. I think each and every person with an axe to grind all of a sudden find this moment as being the moment where he's at his weakest. Hence, all of the attacks. It's smash mouth politics, but Cuomo apparently is a brute in and of himself, so I would imagine he's earned it, or at the very least respects it. James Woolsey, who ran the CIA from 1993 to 1995, made an interesting claim in a new book titled Operation Dragoon, or Dragon, co-authored with Lieutenant General Ian Mihail Pacepa, a former acting chief of Nikolai's espionage service. The book claims that Lee Harvey Oswald, who defected to Russia in 1959 and moved back to the United States in 1961, was a KGB associate on a mission from Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to kill John F. Kennedy. The book was released February 23rd. Woolsey and Pacepa, who died of COVID-19 on February 14th, based their claim on a new interpretation of the 26-volume Warren Commission report published in 1964. They believe, quote, These pieces of evidence prove that John F. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, had clandestine meetings in Mexico City with the Soviet case officer, Comrade Koshtin, who belongs to the KGB's 13th Department for Assassinations Abroad. Oswald was shot and killed on November 24th, 2 days after President Kennedy. He was killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. So basically, the CIA, who is widely considered responsible for killing John F. Kennedy, comes out and say, we didn't kill John F. Kennedy, it was the Russians. Fair enough. The Biden administration is expected to release a declassified U.S. intelligence report today, alleging Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the 2018 killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and critic of the Saudi Crown Prince, went to Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd, 2018. He was killed by a team of operatives. Riyadh eventually admitted that Khashoggi was killed in a rogue extradition operation gone wrong, but it denied any involvement by the Crown Prince. The Saudi Crown Prince has admitted that because the murder happened under his ruling that he would take responsibility. The release would represent the latest move by the U.S. President Joe Biden to realign ties with Riyadh. White House spokesman Jen Psaki told reporters on Wednesday Biden would only have communications with the 85-year-old Saudi king and said the declassified Khashoggi report was being readied for release. What's interesting here in this, that it doesn't show here but needs to be added for context. Khashoggi went to the consulate because he wanted to get the information necessary to marry this a particular woman. I can't think of the woman's name. She was with him, standing outside as he went in. He knew his life was at stake, but he went in for love. He went in for love. That makes it that much worse. She was standing out there as he was in there getting deboned. Now, apparently he was attacked. The embassy was bugged. Turkey and Erdogan came out immediately screaming that the Saudis did it. And you had reports about tapes and whatnot that came out demonstrating that they did it. Now the catch becomes, who has the power to order something like this, if not the crown prince? The people who ended up going to jail for it were basically the scapegoats. But the reality of it is, it was widely believed the person who did it was Prince Salman. Hence, Joe Biden coming in and not dealing with him, but instead dealing with his dad. And like I said in the monologue, the question becomes, what becomes of that? Is that something where you destabilize the region and you get a change in leadership? Or do you just keep it moving along where this is somewhat of an act of theater that Joe Biden doesn't want to deal with Salman directly? Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There has been a lot of talk recently on CNN and MSNBC on this idea of getting Neera Tanden over the finish line. Now, I am not a fan of Tanden, and I made the point when Joe Manchin came out basically saying, yeah, no, she's not going to get my vote. Mitt Romney comes out and says, yeah, no, she's not going to get my vote. And I could have swore Susan Collins came out and said, yeah, no, she's not going to get my vote. That means she does not have enough votes to get across the finish line. And that also means that I was chest thumping. Yes! An enemy, a political enemy that is vilified, attacked, has thrown scorn and crotch rot all out over the last decade or so at her political opponents, the left being one of the major ones. So I was enamored by the fact that she failed. Not just me, the left in general. And yet, the news media is telling me that the left is bothered by her not winning this. Progressives are hurt and assaulted by her not getting over the finish line. Not so much. To have this conversation, we're joined with one Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon is a Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour and the Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. Garland, welcome to the show, man. How's it going?
Wonderful, wonderful. Great to be back, guys.
Absolutely. So I'm pretty sure you've been following the media on this front and have been seeing some of the things that these guys have been saying. Let's listen to the first clip where they're going to make it as if She's a progressive fighter. Let's play the clip.
Confirmed. So why not just pull the nomination? The person said to me, there's not really any upside for the White House in doing that at this point. Maybe it could move the process along by putting someone else up there, but it would just upset her supporters. It would upset progressives and the liberal wing of the party. And their case, too, was that for Tanden, who could also withdraw her name, this has given her high profile. It has increased her popularity with liberals. She's sort of seen as this progressive fighter, and it's just getting her name out there and getting her some visibility. So
she's not considered a progressive fighter. I'm sorry, that it does not line up to reality. In fact, I'm not the only one that thinks so. Let's play the other clip of Senator Kennedy.
I have to tell you, I'm very disturbed about your personal comments about people. It's not just one or two. I think you deleted about 1,000 tweets. And it wasn't just about Republicans. And I don't mind disagreements in policy. I think that's great. I love the dialectic. But the comments were personal. I mean, you call Senator Sanders everything but an ignorant slut.
That is not true.
And when you said these things, did you mean them?
I love the part where Lindsey Graham is in the background saying, well, she didn't say ignorant. This is the slut part. Yes. But he's right. He's right. Like, she attacked and vilified the guy that the left saw as their standard bearer and attacked him viciously and in personal ways. But it wasn't just the tweets, right, Garland? I mean, there was more to it than just the tweets, even though people keep focusing on these tweets.
Yeah, well, and I guess I look at it differently. I've always said this. I can vote for the meanest, orneriest, nastiest person in the world, and just somebody that I despise the very ground they walk on, if their policies are right. So to me, I have a different discussion about Neera Tanden. To me, the statements that she's made, the hyperbolic, vitriolic statements that she's made are consequential in that they reflect who she is. They reflect her policies. They reflect what she stands for, not so much that independently of her policies, I'm angry because she insulted me or she insulted people. So the statements that she made, if I'm a senator, I'm saying, wait a minute, you said that we should invade other countries and that we should make the other countries pay for the invasions so we can invade still more countries. So I think even the discussion of her vitriolic statements and her angry statements and things like that kind of misses the point, and it takes us again away from the policies that she stands for. The fact that, and even it's interesting, even the senators discussing her say, well, we can deal with the fact that you're talking about cutting Social Security and invading and all kinds of horrible things. As long as you don't hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, right. That's the other point. I mean, the indignity of the first black president causing slavery in Libya. Let's stop there for the moment, right? And her making the point that they should pay for it. They should pay for their own destruction. Or the push to cut Social Security. That in and of itself is, antithetical to the left. And even the slush fund that she ran for the Center for American Progress. I mean, Kennedy made the point that says if somebody from Wall Street, if you shook them upside down, the air tendon to fall out their pockets. And even Sanders kind of went through the litany of money that she's gotten, asking basically, hey, does this money have influence? And the obvious answer is yes, regardless of what she says. So, it wasn't, like you said, it's not just the bad things she said on Twitter. It's also the political position and casting that she's taken. And just to be very clear, she has vilified the left viciously on behalf of third-way Democrats, right?
Yeah, and here's another big part of that, I think, and a discussion that creates is this. In this day and age, who the heck is the left? Who the heck is the right? I find it interesting that in to me, Republicans, as their party became less, didn't look good to conservatives and to libertarians anymore. Libertarians were like, whoa, we don't like all of this war stuff. They started conflating conservatism with libertarian. progressivism. Same on the with the Democrats. Now, what they're conflating is progressives with the left, and progressives with these establishment Democrats. Traditionally, if you go worldwide, who is the left? The left is traditionally anti-war. The left is traditionally pro-organized labor, highly suspicious of corporate power, highly suspicious of power being, being put in the hands of a few oligarchs, things of that nature. Now in America, we're arguing that people who are supporting all the things that the left has traditionally fought against worldwide, we're claiming that they're the left. And so I think what we have to look at in America is, we're lied to about wars. We're lied to about the censorship things and online media, et cetera. And people have to start realizing we're also being lied to about who's who when it comes to politics. How can Neera Tanden, we sit there and say she vilifies the left, she attacks the left, she despises the left, Sanders and everyone is dear to him, but yet she is the left. Those two things don't go together, and that brings up another a discussion that conflates the Republicans are all conservative, the Democrats are all progressive, whatever, who's who. Well, these so-called coalitions that make up these two parties are made of starkly different groups, and those groups, those coalitions are starting to shatter. But the mainstream media wants to use a language to pretend as though those coalitions are still all one and they're tight and they're not breaking apart. It's a fraud.
Well, and it's a kind of identity theft. It's a weird thing to do to a group of people, but in some sense, it's pretty darn effective. And for people who don't follow progressive politics too closely, maybe who backed Bernie Sanders back in 2016 and even 2020, but weren't following the day-to-day of interactions between Sanders and the DNC, if they hear that Neera Tanden is a progressive, they might be more likely to support her simply by hearing that stated. And so I can see with some people, with the sort of bulk of people who are, consider themselves progressive, but aren't like political analysts who follow this stuff on a day-to-day basis, I could see them being influenced by it, maybe, but I'm sure it irks many progressives to see her being called that. And again, as a form of identity theft, if what the establishment is doing in this case is shifting the boundaries in order to kind of colonize new spaces or take over these new spaces to claim them as their own, it's difficult to deal with, because then it can be presented as progressive infighting. You can make the case that progressives who don't like Neera Tanden, it's just a sort of another little internecine squabble in this group. And I'm sure it's maddening, but what's the response to it? Can people call themselves progressives anymore without facing not cognitive dissonance, but without facing some weird sort of internal conflict, some kind of internal conflict, because they're starting to use language that has been increasingly co-opted by the establishment that they oppose? Garland, what's your take?
Well, I think what people have to learn, particularly in America, since our ideological lines have been blurred all over the place by the mainstream media, is we have to get to understanding what our policies are. As a person, there's let's use the word, a suite of policies that Garland Nixon believes in, or Shane Stranahan believes in, or whatever. And what we find as human beings is those policies don't always fit into one little group. All my policies aren't policies that all progressives will love. I find people get angry at me, over different things, that my policies don't always align with progressives. And what we have to start doing in America particularly is looking at our policies, look at the politicians, the groups, the coalitions that support the policies that we believe in, and stop getting dragged around by the labels that they put on us. Because when we get caught up just in a label, well, I'm a conservative, I'm a progressive, I'm a whatever, they can put you in this little group, in this little herd, and now you're in a group where 90% of the policies in that group you don't support. They could be antithetical to everything you believe in, but now you're a member of that group and you're herded into supporting a group. And that's what we have now. As people get to understand policies and get to look at what they believe in. I mean, you question yourself, what do I believe in and where does that fit? And if it doesn't fit into Democrats or Republicans or whatever, then understand and accept that. Don't try to force a square peg into a round hole. And I think that's what's going on now. And it's happening because of the desperation, because the traditional parties align less and less with mainstream working class Americans. They have to try try every machination they can to try to hoodwink people into these groups that may have at one time aligned with their policies. But now, to me, we've got a couple of brainwashed cults that are just trying to get people to believe whatever they want them to believe so they can keep their support.
I hear your point on that, Garland. We need to go into a break. We'll be back with you on the other side. For those listening, that's the voice of Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst, and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute on the other side of the short break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's talk about Biden and immigration. Trump, widely reviled by many in the country, not just on the left, but by, wherever you were, by many on his policies on immigration, the detainment of children, separating children from their families, putting them in cages, putting them in ICE detention facilities. And Biden, who ostensibly would be going in the exact opposite direction, as he took office, stated that his policy would be to halt deportations of immigrants in his first 100 days, although that was a little bit tattered. Nevertheless, he ostensibly would be going in the opposite direction, but he recently opened his first his first detainment camp, one of his first facilities, basically reopening a Trump camp. Jen Psaki defending this decision, kind of demurring on the question of whether or not they were putting these kids in cages, although giving some justification. We have a clip for this. I want to hear from Jen Psaki on this. We were talking about this yesterday. Let's follow up on it today, and then we'll go to you, Garland. Andre, let's play this clip from Jen Psaki defending the opening of his camps.
Is there a better description? Is it kids in containers instead of kids in cages? What is the White House's description of this facility?
Well, let me give a broader description of what's happening here. We have a number of unaccompanied minors, children who are coming into the country without their families. What we are not doing, what the last administration did, was separate those kids, rip them from the arms of their parents at the border. We are not doing that. That is immoral, and that is not the approach of this administration. These kids, we have a couple of options. We can send them back home and do a dangerous journey back. We are not doing that either. That is also putting them at risk. We can quickly transfer them from CBP to these HHS-run facilities. That's one option. Or we can put them with families and sponsors without any vetting. There were some problems that process ran into as well. We've chosen the middle option. And these HHS facilities, this is one of them you're referring to, we had to expand and open additional facilities because there was not enough space in the existing facilities and if we were to abide by COVID protocols. That's the process and the step. This facility in Texas, which has been reopened, has been revamped, there are teachers, there is medical facilities, and our objective is to move these kids quickly from there to vetted, sponsored families, and to places where they can safely be. This is a difficult situation. It's a difficult choice. That's the choice we've made.
And she goes on from there to talk about the difference between DHS facilities and CBP facilities and trying to disambiguate the two. But crucially, in this clip and the clip we played yesterday, she doesn't rebut the notion that they're going to be putting kids in cages. Now, maybe that's because they are, or maybe that's because she doesn't know and she doesn't want to say. But I think that if she knew they weren't going to be doing that, she would flatly reject it. And this leaves me wondering, will Biden get hit as hard as Trump was for these policies? Does he deserve that flack? I want to turn now to our guest, Garland Nixon, continuing with us from the last segment. Garland Nixon is again a Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended. That show airs Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern here on Radio Sputnik. Garland, what do you think? Does Biden deserve the flag? Should he be getting this? What's your take?
Well, yes, he deserves the flag. B, he should be getting it. C, not only do I suspect that he won't get beat up much by the mainstream media, if you start beating him up, you'll get deplatformed. But here's my point on that. And let me use a quick analogy. Look, if Garland Nixon runs for office tomorrow and Garland Nixon says, I'm going to crack down on weed smokers, don't believe me, I'm lying. My record says I ain't, right? If Joe Biden runs and he says, I'm going to be less tough on immigration than Donald Trump, don't believe him. His record says otherwise. I worked for the American Civil Liberties Union during the Biden administration, the Obama administration, Freudian slip there, and worked on some cases that was horrible cases with people getting deported that absolutely should not have. And so I know that the record of Obama/Biden was not much different. In fact, they deported more people than the Trump administration. So the reality is Joe Biden just simply lied about his policies, and the media is going to go along like they did with Obama with whatever he does. They're not going to beat him up. But people like us and alternative media should, go all out to expose what he's doing. I tell you what I really hate, guys. What I hate is the 180 people, the people that will say, Trump is terrible for what he did on immigration and his immigration policies. And now that their guy Biden is in, they'll do a 180 and say, well, now that we look at Biden, these things need to be done. That's what really kind of frosts my cookies. But that's what I think we're looking at. Simply, he lied as he has on so many policies. As Trump did, I think that's what we can expect. As Obama did, I think that's what we can expect from presidents now. Simply, they're going to tell us whatever we need to hear to get into office, and then they're going to go do 180s. But you can look at their record and predict what they're going to do based on their record.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, I've had conversations with Democrats where they would say, we must protect the whistleblowers under Donald Trump. And I would point out, well, I mean, Obama was throwing whistleblowers in prison left and right, from the standpoint of, and you could name them, and even point out the whole Julian Assange thing at the time, him being stuck at the embassy. They would say, well, no, it was a difference between the way they whistleblew under Trump and under Obama. Under Trump, they took the correct forms and everything else to do it, but under Obama, no. So it was okay that Obama would put him in prison. I mean, it's warped logic, right? And that's kind of the thing that you hit your head on. Even with us, where you had people who were complaining, saying, I don't see the issue here. Why are the reporters keep bringing up this notion of kids in cages? What do you mean? Why are they bringing it up? The issue of kids in cages. That was one of the big sticking points with Trump. AOC going there crying and flipping out at the camps and whatnot. So, but I would say this, though. There could be a difference. Like, would you agree with that? Like, there could be a tangible difference in the way that Trump ran his camps versus the way Biden is running his camps. So, for example, and I'm not, this is benefit of the doubt, basically, sympathy for the devil on this one. But I remember where one of the lawyers came out arguing that it is a safe and sanitary environment despite the fact that they didn't have soap or feminine products. That nonsense. Well, I haven't heard that being brought up yet. And so there could be this kind of slight material difference incrementally in regards to the conditions that kids are kept in, despite them still being kept in those pens or cages, as opposed to being, I suppose, kept in worse conditions in cages. Is there a difference between those things? Meaning, is the differential sufficient to say that one is not the same as the other? What do you think? How do you see it?
So I'll put it this way, and this is the way, my political mentor, Paul Robeson Jr., he stated a lot of things very, very clearly. And one of the things that he would say is you get varying degrees of the same policy, right? So that's what we're looking at. The policy is not changing, but the degree of the policy, yes, you're in a dungeon and we're going to beat you every day, Jamarl, every morning at 8. Now, this guy's going to beat you for 30 minutes. This guy's only going to beat you for 29 and a half minutes. It's the same policy, but a little lesser and a little more. And so people like you and I and Shane, right? We want different policies with some, I'm saying this particular issue, but we want different policies, maybe foreign policy or things like that. So Biden comes in. He doesn't give you different policies. He gives you a varying degree of the exact same policy. So now what Jen Psaki's trying to do is navigate people who are asking about different policies, and she's trying to navigate that about how she's going to she's going to argue that a different degree, we're turning back the temperature a little teeny bit. We're still going to fry you, but we're not going to fry you at 350 degrees. We're going to fry you at 325. It's going to hurt a lot, but you're not going to be fried quite as quickly as you would. You're still going to end up fried. And that's all it is. That's the way I state it. Different degrees of the exact same policy.
Now, here's one possible exception to this that I want to turn to. Coming up, it's going on this week. It's the dispute over increasing the minimum wage to $15. Now, that might fit into the argument you're making, because some would argue $15 is not high enough for a minimum wage. But I'm curious, how do you think this is going to go? How do you see that going in Congress, Carly?
Oh, I see it probably dying because we are in a neoliberal country. We are in probably the leader of the leading nation of neoliberalism in the world, and they've got to set the tone for the rest of the world of what they're trying to push on the countries they're trying to overthrow, and that is austerity for the people. That is all the power and all the money goes to the corporation. The policies that are passed are going to be policies that benefit the powerful and the corporations, and so I don't see. I see if there's any change in the minimum wage, which I doubt that there will be, I see them being very, very small, because this is just, it's one of some of the things that are going on now. I think some of the arguments that are going on are like an ideological argument that says, if we do X, we're going against kind of the foundation of our policies. And I think that's one of the things with minimum wage. The interesting thing about minimum wage, right, is if you argue that increasing the minimum wage is going to cost us jobs, then conversely, wouldn't that imply that decreasing the minimum wage would increase jobs? But the people who argue the prior argument won't argue the latter, because they know the ethical implications. They know if they start to argue, well, let's move it down to 1 cent an hour, then everybody will have a job. Yeah, but then we'll be the poorest country on earth because everybody will be making 1 cent an hour. So they don't make that argument, but that argument is implied.
Yeah, that argument is implied. And the catch is, it may be a marginal difference, if a difference at all, depending upon how much you raise the minimum wage by. And by the way, they always talk about the jobs thing, and they seem to always over-embellish the number of jobs lost, missing the point that if you are telling people who are making, like $8 working at Walmart, and all of a sudden it goes to 15, you've quantitatively changed their life. And they have money now to spend on other things, which goes into the society also as revenue, whatnot, that allows other people to hire more. Meaning, it's not like the money goes into nowhere. It's not like it vanishes. And in fact, when they put that money into people's pockets like that, it is spent. Meaning the flow and the speed of money increases because you've put the money at the bottom. I don't know if I entirely agree with you that it can't pass, though. We may have a disagreement on this one. Because I don't think, from the standpoint of Democrats and from the standpoint of Joe Biden, it's possible that he wanted to get that through. And that part of the reason he wanted to get it through is to give this impression, or to try to break the impression that the Democratic Party is basically the party of the wealth. Now, you've just had the base of the party, 150 business leaders, sending them a document saying we want to get this thing passed. But like you say, I don't know if that's being passed with the 15. And Biden has been basically downing the possibility of getting the $15 passed. So, look, I think it would be big if it got done. I think the pressure is there to get it done. I think the House wants to get it done. The catch is he going to get it done in the Senate? And is he going to be able to do the things that he wants? And I think, unfortunately, I think you might be right, because I don't think Biden has it in him to push. That's my thought. What do you,
well, the other,
go ahead. You have about 30 seconds.
Thing, I think. Yeah, the other thing that has to be taken into account is these kinds of things, any of these kind of things passing, I think represents the fact that the ruling elite realize that the people are at the Capitol walls with pitchforks and they're a little scared. And some of these things they're going to do, it's we better do this or they're going to come in and get us.
Agreed. Yeah, that's the other part. It's like there's a concern, or at the very least, they're very aware of what is going on around them at this point. Garland, thank you for joining us, man. The voice that you guys have been listening to is Sputnik, political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern right here on Radio Sputnik. And we will be back once again with the same Garland Nixon.
Fault lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking calls. We continue to be joined by Garland Nixon. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. And again, Garland Nixon continues to join us. He is the host and co-host of the Critical Hour and the Critical Hour Extended, a Sputnik political analyst. The show that he works on airs Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. And again, 202-521-1320, we're taking calls, talking about immigration, Neera Tanden, the future of the progressive movement, whether Biden will move on the $15 minimum wage, whether that's enough, all those conversations. Garland, as we were closing out, you were saying, basically, they're possibly pushing these policies through because they're trying to keep the people from storming the Bastille. They're trying to keep people at bay effectively. After January 6th, widespread dissent last summer, many of which we can, bring back to fundamental economic differences for hundreds of millions of Americans, widespread poverty relative to the benefits that the rich have received over the past couple of decades, long-term wage stagnation, a whole bunch of different ways you can break that cookie up. And I think that at least in part, you're absolutely right. Is that, I'm guessing I know where this is going. If they were to do the $15 minimum wage, is that enough? I'll put it like this. If you're trying to put a progressive policy through, for you guys, I'm curious about your perspectives. What would it take? What would you need? Medicare for all? What would the minimum wage be? What kinds of programs would you have in place? It's a pretty expansive conversation, I know, and we didn't prep for this, so I'm not expecting a 20-point proposal here, but what would it take? I'll start with you, Garland. What's your take?
Well, there's we got a bigger problem here, and that is, that America is not a nation. America is an empire. And, people are confused. Americans will say, well, why is it that all of these other countries, all of our allies, they have Medicare for all, but we don't have it? Why is it that they have a better social safety net and we don't have it? Because they're nations. Nations can afford that. An empire can't. They don't have 1,000 bases with soldiers all over the world bombing everybody. That is very, very expensive. So at the core of our problem is that we are an empire, and empires spend so much money. They're so militarily expended. They're so concerned about the empire as an institution that they do not have the resources to take care of home. And that's one of the reasons that empires fall. So do I think we can, as long as we are an empire, we're fooling around the edges trying to fix things at home, but there's never enough money, never enough resources to handle our problems at home. So do I think that we can fix these things? No, we are in steep decline as an empire, and there's no way out of it except to stop being an empire, and that ain't happening.
So I don't know if I entirely disagree with that. I agree we're an empire. Totally agree with that part. Totally agree that we're in decline on some level. But I don't think it's irreversible, if that makes sense. And, for better or for worse, even within the context of an empire, the U.S. is a sovereign currency. It can afford whatever it needs to allocate that's in dollars. So take, for example, healthcare, or just take one example, the F-35. We spent $1.5 trillion on basically a jalopy. It's a lemon, in French say lemon. It's a lemon. $1.5 trillion, and the thing doesn't necessarily work. That's a lot of money. And think about what that money could have spent or paid for. That's education. That's on some level healthcare. That's getting rid of the medical debt in the country. I mean, it is significant what you could do with that much money. And we basically blew it into space. So it's like if we could afford these things, I mean, California by itself always tries to do healthcare, but California would always have a hard time doing that because it's a state and it doesn't control its own currency. We do. We can afford healthcare. We can afford education. Even in the context of it being an empire, we can afford those things. I mean, think about how much we pay for healthcare now. And with Medicare for all, that number would be less. So it's like, can we afford less? Yes, we can afford less. What about schools and sending people to school? The money that we spent for the F-15, or F-35, if I'm not mistaken, is enough to send people to school. So, yeah, we can do these things. And yes, we can afford these things. And the $15 an hour minimum wage should be, that's a compromise. That's a compromise. I mean, and honestly, even getting rid of the $50K in student debt, that's a compromise. Joe Biden can do that with the flick of a pen. That's kind of what I mean. It's like the empire thing, yeah, it needs to stop. By the same token, even within the context of the empire, you can take care of your citizens. And the irony of it is, if you take care of your citizens, they will let you continue with that empire. So there's that. We have plenty of callers, but Garland, do you want to respond?
Here's what I'll say about the F-35. The F-35 is an extremely successful program. The F-35 was not intended to be a military aircraft. It's a money laundering operation. So they put $1.5 trillion into the hands of their cronies. They could care less. You know what? If the F-35 was like a plastic model plane that was a foot long that they gave away to children, and they just stuck it on, they just stuck a picture up with a green screen and put something in the background, that'd be just as fine as what they have now. It's not as good as the planes they have, but they didn't design it to do that. They designed it to make a fortune, and they're making a fortune. Thusly, that's where the U.S. is now. We don't do these things for the end result of the product to be good. We do it so we can launder money. That's the way our politicians, the Democratic Party, they don't even work to get elected. If they get elected, that's a great byproduct of the money laundering operation. They're putting money in the hands of their friends, of their groups, of their parties, over and over again. So that's just based on the F-35. That's my argument for that.
And if they put out the plastic airplane, they could accompany it with a little children's book called The Very Hungry Raytheon. That would be good. And true to fact, we've got callers. I think we should go to them. We got a bunch at this point. Funny. Michael from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. Yeah, What's going on then?
Yeah, hey guys, Garland, good to hear your voice again. And look, Garland, I do agree with you. The F-35 program and the money they spend on it is an extension of empire. It's basically, and they call it imperial overstretch. Especially what Rome died of, whatever is what the English Empire died of, is imperial overstretch. And basically, they try to fund it through currency, as you're suggesting. Jamarl, but unfortunately currency, when you just print it, becomes inflationary and devalues the value of your currency and leads to hyperinflation.
Well, it depends.
And destroys your economy. You do need hard money. And I agree with everything else most things you say, Jamarl, actually 90% what you say. And on that point, I also agree with the grey zone. I actually love the grey zone. I did criticise an article the other day, but I've been watching Match Blue NFL for years. The guy's great. He's an awesome journalist and he does really good stuff. And also, you're talking a lot about the hypocrisy of the left, not the faux left, the Democrats. I mean, it's not, and this comes from extensive empire too. I mean, and criticising Israel. Israel, under the Geneva Convention, the rights of the obligation of an occupier, is actually collectively punishing the Palestinians for the crimes of a few people in Palestine, right, against the Jewish state. And they're basically collectively punishing them. They're cutting off their water. The Gaza Strip only gets 3 hours of electricity a day. They don't have running sewage. Okay, people are starving. They ration their calories. So that, their children are malnutritioned. I mean, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, they knock down their farmland. They're putting walls up. They're dividing communities. They're cutting roads through them. They're basically controlling their movement. Even within their own area, they're controlling their movement. Israel is committing crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank.
They have an open-air ghetto. It's an open-air ghetto. And it's like the idea of criticizing it. If you're in, the UK, all of a sudden, Palestinians are human beings. It's like, oh, you're an anti-Semite. It's that nonsense. So, yeah, Michael, yes.
Agreed. We got a lot more callers. Michael, thank you for the call. I want to make sure we've got enough time, as much time as we can get at this point. We've got 3 more on the line. Hopefully we can get to them. Nancy calling in from Florida. Nancy, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hi, yes. I have a question for Garland. Since we were talking about empire and the U.S. empire, what are the chances that maybe some of the other countries in the world might start getting together and trying to challenge our empire? Just a question.
A quick answer to that, that's what's happening, and yes, and the interesting thing is it's not just kind of the anti-imperialist, the China, Russia, Iran, etc. bloc. Right now, if you look at the Nord Stream 2 controversy, it's Germany and Russia versus the United States in the Nord Stream 2 controversy battle, whatever. So the U.S. is creating a dynamic where their own allies have to ally with countries that are considered adversaries because we treat everybody the same. We're an empire. There are countries that we have conquered, and there's countries that we intend to conquer. And Germany apparently doesn't realize they're in the prior category, and some of our allies are starting to push back, saying we just don't want to be vassal states. They're looking for multipolarity in the world, and the U.S. is saying we'll have none of that. So we're creating dynamics which I think is a good thing to me. I think it's a good thing if some of our adversaries wake up and push back against the empire.
And ostensible friends. You're talking about Germany. I mean, they've been Heiko Maas, Germany's foreign minister, has admittedly been going against Russia on the Navalny stuff, but there's a serious conflict of interest with the nation there with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We were talking about that the other day. We got a couple more callers, though. Thank you for the call, Nancy. Let's go to David calling in, also from Florida. David, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. A couple real quick things. The worst thing that has happened in this country in the last 50 years has been the elimination of the draft. It has given us 20 years of endless war, which also means you have to have a big war budget. The second thing is, with the $15 pay raise, not being able to afford it, we always have money to pay the congressmen their pay raise. And lastly, I was very disappointed with January 6th. To me, if anything was going to get changed, there had to be one Republican senator, one Democratic senator, one Republican House member, one Democratic House member, and the Vice President getting his neck stretched. If you would have had 4 deaths and the Vice President getting his neck stretched, we'd have change.
Well, I don't think it would be the change that you want. I honestly don't. I mean, you basically had a terroristic putsch of them trying to install Trump. I honestly don't think Pence being killed in that situation would have turned out all that good. I just don't. That's not. And I gotta be honest. That's not necessarily something I need to see. That's. I agree with the other parts. That part, I think, is too dark. I mean, what happens to your government after that? And what change do you think you're going to get? And it's not the change that I think you're going to get. You're going to get massive, vicious repression. That's what you're going to end up getting. You're going to get rights curtailed. Do you realize they still have troops sitting out there right now in D.C.? What, like 1,000 troops or something? Some insane number. So yeah, but thank you for the call, David. I agree with most of what you said, not that last part. Brave, we have Okay, Brave, we're gonna have to come back to you, my man, because we only have like 30 seconds. So please call back in the last, in the wrap, and I promise we'll get to you. All right, guys. Garland, as always, man, I appreciate you joining us. The voice that you guys were listening to is Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour of this morning's show. That's the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more across our country, as well as across the surface of our fragmented globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Hope everybody's morning continues to go well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 3,210 new coronavirus deaths and 74,076 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 68,595 cases per day. That's a decrease of 30% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And as of this morning, more than 28,353,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus. More than 505,600 have died from it. More than 150 senior executives from some of the largest American companies across several major industries have lined up behind President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief packages. These companies range from bank and investment firms like Goldman Sachs and Blackstone to technology companies like Google, Intel, and IBM, to airlines, including American and United Airlines. Top executives from real estate, insurance, and utility firms also signed on to the letter. Republican support, to this point at least, has remained non-existent. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has called the plan totally partisan. Biden, over the course of his first month in office, has relentlessly pressed lawmakers to pass his cornerstone legislative proposal, which includes funding for schools, vaccine distribution and infrastructure, states and localities, direct payments, and extensions of expiring unemployment insurance programs. On Monday in North Dakota, a bill was approved to ban requirements of wearing face masks in the state. The bill, now on its way to the state Senate, would bar state and local officials, schools, and businesses from mandating masks. The bill's sponsor, State Representative Jeff Hoverson, stated that the measure would only impact government entities, yet the one-page bill includes a subsection that, quote, prohibits making use of a face mask, shield, or covering a condition for entry, education, employment, or services, end quote. Matt Gardner, GNDC's legislative director, has stated that, quote, our intent is to oppose it in the Senate, end quote. To date, more than 1,400 residents have died of COVID-19 in North Dakota.
Can we point to
national political news?
Wait, can we point to how manic, how unhinged that is? Like, we had 3,000 people die today, and I could see if you as an individual don't want to wear masks. I can see if you don't like masks. I can see if you as an individual has found them unmanly. But to jump the shark and go so far as to say we want to stop localities that actually may be dealing with coronavirus from putting certain restrictions either on the businesses or from the government standpoint, that's so unhinged. That just seems so unnecessary. It's like, if those companies or those localities need to wear masks, let them wear masks. What is your issue with this? If I, my business, want to ensure that my customers are safe and okay, and one of the ways I want to do that is to ensure that they wear masks, and I want to ensure that they wear masks. Maybe I have family members that have some kind of medical issue or something. Are you telling me that me and my business interests, or for that reason, my health interests, I can't tell people to wear masks if they're coming into my business? I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, it seems so off the reservation. in regards to going after something that is insignificant in regards to trying to stop a particular illness or disease, even if it's for a person's peace of mind. Legislating and making that a law seems out there.
I think my take is a little bit off the wall in its own way. I think it's confusing. We're now entering triple negative territory. The state is preventing businesses from preventing customers from entering the establishment without wearing a mask.
Yeah. How weird.
And then it'll become quadruple negative territory if, like, the Supreme Court rules on this, which I doubt they will. But we're not there yet. I'm gonna get back to the headlines here. Point taken, Jamarl. In national political news, Senator Lisa Murkowski said Wednesday that she hasn't made a decision on Neera Tanden's nomination, leaving President Biden's pick to lead the Office of Management and Budget in limbo as two Senate panels postponed their votes on Neera Tanden. Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders added that it was no great secret that Tanden didn't currently have the votes to be confirmed. That knowledgeable lady, Bernie Sanders. Tanden has come under scrutiny from Republicans concerning previous tweets she made criticizing several senators, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senator Susan Collins, and Murkowski. To uphold her nomination, the White House needs to pick up at least one GOP senator. A new report reveals President Biden and other Democrats received more campaign money from leading border security and immigration prison corporations than Trump during the 2020 election season. According to the report by the Transnational Institute, American Friends Service Committee, and Mehente, Biden received over $5 million from border security executives. That's over $3 million more than former President Donald Trump. A former aide to Governor Andrew Cuomo, Lindsey Boylan, published an essay on Wednesday accusing the governor of sexual harassment, saying he jokingly suggested a strip poker game and gave her an unwanted kiss on the lips, among other unsettling episodes. She states she left her job as a special advisor to the governor shortly after the incident. Ms. Boylan first publicly accused Cuomo of sexual harassment in posts on Twitter in December. Cuomo denied her allegations at the time. She wrote that there are many more of us, but most are too afraid to speak up. Scrutiny on Cuomo's personal conduct came after Ron Kim, a Queens assemblyman, publicly criticized the governor and said that Cuomo had threatened to destroy him. The governor's administration is under fire for withholding data on coronavirus-related deaths of nursing home residents, which has led federal prosecutors to open an investigation. Exactly what his other aide said she didn't want, that the Cuomo administration was afraid of in a private meeting with Democratic lawmakers, in which, again, they froze basically because they didn't want Trump's DOJ to come cracking down on them for mishandling the crisis. And coming back to Lindsey Boylan for a second, other weird bits. If you read through her essay on this over on Medium, Lindsey Boylan, former aide to Governor Cuomo, she said that she looked early on in her job. She was told that Cuomo had a crush on her, and that may be due to her looking like the more attractive sister of a former girlfriend of Cuomo's, Lisa Shields, who, by the way, manages media stuff over at the Council on Foreign Relations. Just throwing that in there. Anyway, Lindsey Boylan said that she was called Lisa by the governor a couple of times when they met.
That's so creepy.
It is creepy. It is, exactly. So I'm throwing that in, just to add flavor into the thing, to add, relevant facts, but also to give people some of the creepiness and cringiness of what he was apparently doing there. I should say allegedly, because again, it's just alleged. He hasn't fessed up to it yet, but I believe her. Weird stuff. Not good, and not good for Cuomo, who, like we've been talking about, has come under increasing fire. And you were right, Jamarl. We were ahead of the story. We were weeks ahead of the national media talking about this story, talking about how Cuomo had mishandled this crisis despite being trumpeted as, as a major prominent adversary to Donald Trump in COVID response, and ostensibly a figure who had handled the crisis deftly while he undercounted deaths, left thousands to die in nursing homes, and then hid from the Trump administration scrutiny over his mishandling of it. It's not a good turn of events for Cuomo. We'll see if he gets ousted next election or sooner with a potential impeachment. Internationally, in political news, James Woolsey, who ran the CIA from 1993 to 1995, has made a claim in a new book titled Operation Dragon, co-authored with Lieutenant General Ion Mihai Pacepa, a former acting chief of Nicolae Ceausescu's espionage service. The book claims that Lee Harvey Oswald, who defected to Russia in 1959 and moved back to the U.S. in 1961, was a KGB associate on a mission from Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to kill John F. Kennedy. The book was released February 23rd. Woolsey and Pacepa, who died of COVID-19 on February 14th, based their claim on a new interpretation of the 26-volume Warren Commission report published in 1964. They believe that, quote, these pieces of evidence prove that John F. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, had a clandestine meeting in Mexico City with his Soviet case officer, Comrade Kostin, who belongs to the KGB's 13th Department for Assassinations Abroad, end quote. Oswald was shot and killed on November 24th, 2 days after killing President Kennedy. He was killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. We've got to come back to this. This is interesting. Admit, for some people, this is, almost 60 years ago, long time ago. But of course, theories about how JFK died, technically conspiracy theories, but I'm not using that term derogatorily, rumors about how JFK died still abound to this day. And in my opinion, they still hold a lot of significance if you're looking at what the intelligence services do in this country. People making the argument that they're a kind of Praetorian Guard that can protect or attack the President of the United States. Anyway, moving on to our next headline. The Biden administration is expected to release a declassified U.S. intelligence report today alleging that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the 2018 killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and critic of the Saudi Crown Prince, went into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey on October 2nd, 2018. He was killed by a team of operatives, gruesomely dismembered. This broke internationally when it happened. Riyadh eventually admitted that Khashoggi was killed in a rogue extradition operation gone wrong, but it denied any involvement by the Crown Prince. Saudi Crown Prince has admitted that because the murder happened under his ruling, that he would take responsibility for it. The release of this statement would represent the latest move by U.S. President Biden to realign ties with Riyadh. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki told reporters on Wednesday Biden would only have communications with the 85-year-old Saudi king and said that the declassified Khashoggi report was being readied for release. Meanwhile, also in Saudi news, a statement from the royal court has said Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman underwent a successful surgery to remove his appendix yesterday. In Ecuador, at least 79 inmates have died in riots at 4 prisons across the country. As of Wednesday, 31 people died at that prison in Guayaquil, while 6 others died at another prison in the same city. 34 were reported dead at a prison in a southern city and 8 more in a central city. Videos recorded by inmates and shared on social media showed mutilated bodies in the aftermath of the bloodbath. An investigation into the deadly riots is ongoing, and special units are carrying out operations. In Armenia, opposition political party Prosperous Armenia supported the demand for Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's resignation and called on the head of the government to step down immediately. A statement has been issued stating that, quote, the statement of the armed forces and the general staff calling for standing side by side with the people and the statehood is a game changer. We call on Nikol Pashinyan not to go toward a civil war, not to shed Armenian blood inside the country, not to sow discord among Armenians. Nikol Pashinyan has the last chance to step down politically with no shocks, end quote. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also fired the head of the country's armed services, broadcasting that decision live after accusing the military of an attempted coup before marching in the streets with his supporters. Now, Pashinyan has been pretty wildly unpopular by our accounts, at least by what we've heard in the country, after conceding to Azerbaijan in the recent conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, which ended in Azerbaijan's favor. He, at the time, said that it was recommended to him by the military that he end the war, but he'd also started it, and so I can understand. You start something, then you stop it, and you lose. That's going to make you less popular, and there's a lot of sentiment in Armenia pushing for the reclamation of those territories. So we'll see about that conflict. It may not be over yet. In fact, it certainly is not. Hopefully, it doesn't resume too fiercely too soon. In tech news, William J. Burns, a veteran diplomat tapped to be the next CIA director, says he will follow through with the agency's plans to adopt artificial intelligence technology to counter the activities of Chinese spies. Mr. Burns, who appeared at a confirmation hearing before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence on Wednesday, has claimed China is spending greatly in AI and also artificial intelligence innovation to reinforce its knowledge and its counterintelligence abilities. A written statement from Burns reads that the CIA, quote, must meet this challenge by transforming how it collects, analyzes, and disseminates intelligence, end quote. I don't want the CIA to have really advanced AI. I'll put it that simply. That's not the group that I want to have hands-on really advanced artificial intelligence technology.
Let me ask you this. What if other countries had it?
Collecting, analyzing. Go for it.
What if other countries had it?
That's. I'll put it like this, man. For a long time, and to this day, I was and am worried about the development of general artificial intelligence, GAI, something like that. Basically, a rogue AI that recursively improves its abilities and gets smart enough that to the point where it's smarter than any living human being, and maybe smarter than the aggregate of human beings. In which case, it does whatever it's going to do, whatever its ethics are at that point, whatever is aligning its actions. It's going to get ugly potentially. I'm doubtful that military intelligence agencies around the world are the ones who should have their hands on the reins of creating that AI and setting its ethics up. Does that make sense? So I don't want any of it.
But human beings act because of emotion, not because of intellect, if that makes sense. Like the first basis of a person doing something is an emotional basis. It's like data. There's a book called Is Data Human? Or Is Data Person? Or something like that. And that was kind of the thing. It's like what makes him do whatever he does. He doesn't get hungry. He doesn't get full. He doesn't get whatever. And if it doesn't have those pressures, why is it doing anything? That's my only thing. I don't know why it would do X or Y. And so that gets into what is it programmed for? And that part, that's where I agree with you. I think it's a little scary.
I hear you. I don't want any of them with their hands on this stuff. So I'm gonna refuse to answer that one. I'm just gonna say a flat no. We need to cut it here. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute talking about Bolivia with Sputnik producer Wyatt Reed. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. One of the stories that I followed and was aghast by was the coup that took place in Bolivia. Now, it felt as if it was monstrously wrong. Evo Morales was wildly popular president, and on top of being wildly popular, he was wildly successful, especially from lowering poverty, increasing intellectual capacities of the nation through education, but also healthcare, and bringing the indigenous population into the government, something up to that point wasn't done, despite the fact that I believe Bolivia is like 60 or 70% of an indigenous population. Evo lost his government in a violent coup. Now, the person who headed this coup government, Jeanine Arnaz, was leader of the coup government that took power from Evo in 2019. She is in legal trouble. Now, the ensuing kleptocracy that Jeanine Arnaz led lasted for a little less than a year when they were blown out, again, in another landslide, in this case by Luis Arce of the Movement for Socialism Party. Arnaz is accused of failing to comply to, and this is Telesur, quote, is accused of failing to comply with a constitutional resolution that ordered the delivery of COVID-19 equipment, human resources, and biosecurity supplies to Chiquiseska Department. She and several members of her cabinet are currently under investigation for the crime of economic damage after irregularly arranging a loan for $347 million with the International Monetary Fund. Of course, they took a loan out that they didn't particularly need the moment that somebody else took over the government. Think about that. Do you think those things are related to one another or not? They, of course, are. Joining us to discuss is Wyatt Reed, a Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary, which airs on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Wyatt, what's going on, man? Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jamarl. I'm hanging in there. How about yourself?
We're hanging in there also. We're doing all right. This story, I loved. I love this story because to me, put her in jail, put her in prison. And I got to be honest, I don't even care all that much the reason. If you need to come up with a reason for this, fair enough. By the same token, they violently took power from Evo Morales. And this charge that they're hitting her with, basically the International Monetary Fund, they got a loan for $347 million, meaning the government that took over after that would have been stuck with that loan, despite the fact that the country didn't want that loan. If you think back to Ecuador, something similar. It's like these guys will get loans that basically subject those countries to these kind of imperialist powers of sorts, and allows those countries to get their hand on those resources, privatizing resources, be it gas, water, electricity, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in this case, they paid the loan back. They had to pay, $24 million on the loan? And that was just over the course of less than a year? I mean, this is astonishing. So do you think she's going to be prosecuted for this? I mean, like I said, I think she should be prosecuted for this. And right here, in just 9 months, Janine Arnaz, $346.7 million IMF loan cost Bolivia $24.3 million. That's amazing. It seems like, and I could be wrong, that she wanted to put the country to which she was leading under the thumb of outside powers, which is what that IMF loan would have done over the course of time. What are your thoughts, Wyatt? Am I hitting something on this, or am I way off on this? I mean, this seems to be a playbook type affair.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not far off base in terms of the actual, effect that a decision like this would have on the Bolivian people in the long term. Yeah, that is the consequence. You return the Bolivian people to being under the thumb of international loan sharks, effectively. This was something that Evo Morales hated, campaigned against, and when he came to power, he immediately kicked out the IMF. And he's obviously celebrating these developments. In terms of the return of the loan, he described it as a traitorous and onerous loan taken out by the dictatorship against the interests of our people, and said Bolivia is free, dignified, and sovereign once again. But there's a couple of things happening here in terms of the actual prosecution of Arnaz, which is taking place for a variety of reasons, right? The main investigation into her, or at least the one that is that she basically refused to participate with in the past week, is actually for negligence in the handling of medical supplies in the Chuquisaca department. The doctors in that hospital system requested a number of supplies, and that request was essentially ignored by the Arnaz coup regime. And of course, that was a big part of the reason Bolivia was so heavily impacted at the beginning of the pandemic. That and mismanagement that, from the perspective of not just the state, really, but the people who brought these charges, which are, it's being pointed out, these are not Mas party members, right? These are constitutional lawyers. They're independent. They don't have formal affiliation with the Mas party in any way. So that's, who's behind those particular charges that Arnaz essentially being charged with failing to participate, failing to show up in that case. And then there's, also separately, there are charges. Andronico Rodriguez, Senate leader, has brought up basically the possibility of charges for taking out this loan. That would be a separate charge. They haven't gone as far in this process yet, but they say that this basically endangered the Bolivian economy, put the interests of the Bolivian people at risk. And then there's also, of course, the charges for Áñez's ordering of the massacres in Sencata and Sacaba, left well over 30 people dead. This is a separate legal proceeding, and that is on its own timeline. That timeline is more heavily dependent on the investigation that's being conducted into the massacres by international bodies like the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. These bodies that have essentially been participating in overseeing the search for justice for these victims, and they represent, and I've met and spoken with a lot of the people who were participating in that procession when I was covering Bolivia last year, when I was in, or rather in 2019 when I was in Sencata after the massacre, really as the massacre was occurring. There's some good people there, and a lot. Generally, I don't have a lot of faith in sort of UN affiliated mechanisms to actually get real justice for working people, especially in less developed countries. But in this case, there do seem to be some good people who are genuinely interested in getting justice for the victims of the massacres. And I think from the government's perspective, they want to wait until a report is published that will be seen as being more impartial than, what the government puts out. There's certain suspicion from certain sectors about what the Mas Party says about those massacres, and there's essentially rumors that still persist that somehow the Mas Party killed themselves, or they killed indigenous people, or the Cubans were somehow related. These total nonsense, of course, but that is kind of the parallel reality of fake news that the Áñez crowd, it's kind of a Frankenstein's monster at this point, that people like her and Luis Fernando Camacho, obviously we have a parallel with our Trumpers who live in kind of parallel reality land where maybe COVID isn't real, or if it is, it's a Chinese scam. Or
Wyatt, we only have about 3 minutes. So one last thing before we close out. The U.S.'s influence in this. So if we remember correctly, Elon Musk put out some kind of tweet saying we coup whoever we want or something like that. Tesla stock jumps on the news of the coup because basically there's a huge lithium reserve in Bolivia. That lithium reserve was going to go to China apparently, and they were going to have a deal where they were going to learn, or basically instead of shipping the resource out, they were going to have a deal where people was going to learn how to do it in Bolivia, in addition to industry in Bolivia, with a great idea, by the way. You're not just going to take the product, we're going to get something out of it ourselves. And so this was taking place. He was going to work with China on this. You had people who were in the government that were part of the opposition that was sending out requests saying, help us, hey, get this organization talking about the OAS to do something about it. And then just so happened the OAS responded. You also had many of the people who were part of the Bolivian coup to have, let's say, ties to U.S. interests. That's part of the reason why this became such an interesting story, in addition to the coup itself, because there was a potential influence of the United States in this. Can you talk about this for a moment? I mean, there was secret tapes released by Telesur on this and all, showing a certain influence with the U.S. interests?
Well, there's these ties. I mean, some of them are obvious. Some of them are clear right in front of our face. A number of the generals involved in the military overthrow of Evo Morales were trained at what was once called the School of the Americas, now referred to as WINSEC after it was rebranded. But then there's still serious concerns about a high-level meeting that apparently took place here in D.C. In the weeks running up to the coup, and whether or not there was, involvement on the part of U.S. diplomats, very much still up in the air. There have been a number of leaked recordings that indicate U.S. involvement on a very high level. But rather than kind of looking around for this smoking gun, I mean, it really just boils down to, first of all, the interests being served, and second of all, the immediate reaction on the part of the Trump administration to recognize this. Let's be clear, she's kind of a random woman. Her party received 4% of the vote last go round. So she had no real claim to have any kind of mandate, of course. And that's who the Trump administration decided to just immediately, overwhelmingly, warmly welcome to the international community. And of course, Bolsonaro as well, Jair Bolsonaro, far-right Brazilian president, wasn't far behind.
Yeah, it was. So, and that was unfortunate. I mean, it looked like the moment that one happened, the coup thing was, and it seems like it was a pushback against some of the left-wing governments that had taken power. You have Rafael Correa, he was out with Moreno in, basically a pawn of the U.S. You have Bolsonaro, who basically loved Trump. I think you had Colombia. I mean, many of these guys were in some of these right-wing governments. So, yeah. Wyatt?
Trump had a coup in Bolivia and Nicaragua and Venezuela. It all failed, and he wanted a successful coup, and he finally got it in Bolivia.
Yeah, that was it. The voice that you guys are listening to is Wyatt Reed. Wyatt Reed's a Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary, which airs, sorry, a bit hoarse today, on Radio Sputnik from Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. You can follow Wyatt on Twitter at WyattReed13 and listen to By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking about the EU vaccine debacle. This is as the European Union has had difficulties procuring vaccines. This is as the AstraZeneca vaccine developed with Oxford University in the UK has been widely distributed in the UK, leaving almost a third of Britons vaccinated at this point. While meanwhile in Germany, the leading economic power in the European Union powerhouse has a total of, last I checked, about 6% vaccination. And of course, there was a big conflict between the EU and the UK over the delivery of these vaccines, with the UK retaining them for their own use. In that process, it seems like the idea of getting this specific vaccine was dirtied, with the German press criticizing it. And now that they have it, now that the EU has access to it, German citizens are slow on the uptake to actually go and get it. They don't want to receive it because they've been told that it doesn't work. Now, Angela Merkel's spokesman has come out and spoken in favor of that jab. So has Ursula von der Leyen. There's basically a good deal of cognitive dissonance in this story. To talk about it, we are joined now by Peter Oliver. Peter Oliver is the EU correspondent for RT International. He provides daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. Peter, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, guys. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you back, and so soon. A couple times this week now. Thank you again for being with us. Let's talk about this.
Cognitive dissonance, definitely. We've gone from both population and politicians being outraged that there wasn't enough vaccines. We had seen for a while that in cities like where I'm speaking to you from, in Berlin, the German capital, there was the infrastructure in place to give out vaccines, but there wasn't the vaccines to give. People were terribly upset about that, as you could imagine, particularly looking across the English Channel to what was happening in the UK, where they've done quite well with this. But now they have the vaccines. People are not that keen on having one particular one of them, the AstraZeneca vaccine. We're seeing that being given out at the moment to people under the age of 65 here in Germany. So the way that the tiers of who gets vaccines when works, it's currently being given to medical staff at the moment, those that work in hospitals and medical centres, care homes, everything like that. The AstraZeneca vaccine isn't approved for use in over 65, so it's currently not being given to old people, essentially. Not that anybody immediately becomes old once they reach 65, but Germany decided that there wasn't enough data to support in the testing of the vaccine to support giving it to those over the age of 65. The UK has given it to those over the age of 65, and everything seems to be going pretty well there. But what we've seen here is, around 15% of those AstraZeneca vaccines have been used. We're talking 15% out of 1.4 million doses. So there's an awful lot of them sitting on shelves places in Germany. We've also seen some of the medical facilities in the state of Lower Saxony decided they weren't going to we're going to suspend giving the AstraZeneca vaccine. This is after 37 staff out of 88 who'd been vaccinated with the AZ vaccine in a hospital in Lower Saxony had to take time off following what they described as vaccine reactions. This particular jab has caused a lot of problems. You spoke earlier about the spat between the UK, AstraZeneca, and the EU. That's kind of like that family argument that happened when everybody was a bit drunk and nobody ever brings up at the moment. That's how that has gone down, because it wasn't pretty. It wasn't edifying in the slightest from the EU side. They managed to do something that nobody's really been able to do and unify all sides in the situation in Northern Ireland in being against the European Union over what Brussels was trying to do. But what we have at the moment is what they're calling an image problem, or what the French are calling an image deficit for the AstraZeneca vaccine. And it doesn't show any real sign of abating. If we take the very latest stats, they came to me just before I came to speak to you. Germany vaccinated 30,000 people yesterday. They will receive another 650,000 doses of this AstraZeneca vaccine this weekend. Here in Berlin, they're currently taking about 400 people for vaccinations of AstraZeneca. They've got capacity for 3,800 a day.
That's amazing. Wow. I mean, I was looking at the article. It has something like, 6% of the population?
6.4.
Yeah.
6.4% of the population have had one injection. I think if you look at the UK, they're
26.
well over a quarter.
The UK is at 26% of the population. So they are far behind.
we had a newspaper. One thing, sorry, I'll just jump in there. We had a newspaper article in the big tabloid here, Bild, which their headline yesterday read, "Dear Brits, we envy you," which it's not particularly renowned for being a particularly pro-British publication, but yeah, that was their headline yesterday, talking about these vaccines.
But that's where they are now. That's amazing. And I guess that leads to two questions. What are they doing with all of the additional supply? Because if they're not using that, this article is making the point that says, 150,000 out of 1.5 million doses of the vaccine have been used. So where's the rest of the doses? And this also gets to the whole vaccine nationalism stuff. We were experiencing it from the standpoint of states, where the government will basically go in and take supplies. This was astonishing. But the government was basically taking supplies. You had states that were putting policemen in order to defend their supplies of vaccines and everything else. But you guys, or let's say Europe, 4 freedoms. And one of those is movement, transportation. And yet, that's being breached as countries have basically said the politics have changed. We need to make sure that we keep this precious, precious thing, and we don't want it going into other areas. So what is Germany, one, doing with the supply? And B, this notion that the vaccine being moved from one place to the next in countries basically putting up borders saying, we're not going to allow that to leave.
Let's start with the second one first. What's happening with the borders is a bit different to that. That's more to do with the transportation of people. The vaccine procurement inside the EU was decided that it would be done centrally. Basically, the EU Commission is in charge of this and of procuring all of the vaccines, giving them out to the various member states. Where that vaccine nationalism has come in is countries like Germany have also then done side deals with these producers, and that means that's why Germany's ended up with a lot of doses. They were trying to play both sides, as it were. They were going with the EU all for one and one for all program, but also saying, look, when you've delivered those, make sure we get our supply as well, so we've got some extras. What we're seeing with the border closings, that's more to do with the stopping the spread of the new variants of the COVID-19 virus. That's a slightly different issue. But when it comes to these doses that Germany's now stockpiled, well, exactly. You've got a number of issues. One, you've got people like Karl Lauterbach, who's a member of the Social Democratic Party here. They're the junior coalition partner in Angela Merkel's government. He's got a pretty decent extra string to his bow. He's also a professor of epidemiology. So when he speaks about this stuff, you would think he knew what he was talking about. He's suggesting, why are we being so slow in vaccinating people that we could be giving this to? Never mind just giving it to those working in hospitals. Give it to police officers, teachers, educators. It does seem like they're going to start giving it to teachers very soon. But they need to give this vaccine to more people, because if they don't, there's a time limit for this. These vaccines can go off. They also are no use to anybody. And when I say anybody, I mean the world as a whole. Because what we've heard time and time again from the World Health Organization is nobody is essentially vaccinated until we're all vaccinated, and all of us around the world. So there's also now starting to be a fair few voices saying, if you're not using these vaccines, and we've heard this from Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the World Health Organization, saying that there are countries that can be using these. If you're going to be umming and ahhing and dithering, as it's also being called, over giving out this vaccine or taking this vaccine, there are nations that will have them.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking if the Germans aren't using it, it was literally just yesterday, I believe, that Ghana received its first doses of COVID vaccines as a part of international efforts to get it to developing countries who also need it. How has Brussels seen this? I mean, has Brussels called for that kind of thing yet? Is there any sort of upcry either from the public or more likely from the UN, or frankly some leadership in Germany to do that? That would be potentially.
You're seeing this from. If I was to look into my crystal ball, I think this is going to be one of the issues that's going to be on my agenda for next week. Is more statements because what you're looking at the moment is Germany has a glut of vaccines and not an uptake on people taking them. Now, you've heard from the World Health Organization saying that these high-income countries need to cooperate in respecting deals that have been done through COVAX, the global UN-funded and UN-backed vaccine delivery system. You're going to start seeing real calls for that. Now, I've heard it from some Green Party politicians here. At the moment, those in power, they seem to be more about getting it into the arms of their own citizens right now. And that's why we've seen the likes of Stefan Seibert, who's Angela Merkel's spokesperson, saying that he would have one. The AstraZeneca vaccine's fine. The Jens Spahn, the German health minister's also said he'd gladly be injected with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So there's an attempt to try and say, look, to try and get the vaccines used here in Germany. And I'm sure it's a similar thing. I know fine well it's a similar thing in France, actually. They've just yesterday said that they could use it on people from 60 upwards. Sorry, 50 upwards, I beg your pardon.
I have a hard time believing that they're going to kick those out the country. I have a hard time believing it. I think it's politically difficult, if not impossible.
I can see there being calls for it to happen. I can certainly see there being calls for it to happen. This is why I think it might be an issue for me next week with whatever comes out of sessions in the Bundestag or what we hear coming from interviews to the press. But I can't see at the moment, when you're looking at just coming up on 70,000 deaths here in Germany, I can't see them say, and only 6.4% of the population having been vaccinated, Germany turning around and saying, we're going to send some vaccines abroad. I can't see that happening.
I would do it if they have some access. You can ship them to me.
You wouldn't dare do it. I don't think either of you would do it.
When has that ever got in the way of it happening?
I'll put it this way. If you two were in political parties and I was in the opposition and you did that, I would eat you alive. I would eat you alive.
Especially when there's an election coming up in September.
Right. I mean, that's what I mean. It's hard to do that. Like because even if you don't give it to the people who don't want it, you can still give it to people that do. I guarantee you, if they opened it up, they could give get rid of those things within Germany. They just don't want to give it to them.
I'll put it like this, though.
Go for it.
Here in the United States, we've had this sort of meme phenomena, and people do it. I know people who've done it, and articles have been written about it, et cetera. It's like vaccine dumpster diving, and that puts images into your mind that you probably don't want to have in your mind of people getting stabbed by needles. But really what it means is people waiting around at clinics where, you have a certain number of these doses that you pull out of the freezer. They're only going to be good for so long. Some people have appointments to get them. They don't get there in time, or they don't arrive at all. And therefore you have a number of doses that are ostensibly going to go bad within a matter of hours. And so people in this country have been lining up and organizing to find clinics that will let them take them, take the vaccines in lieu of the people getting them, because they missed their appointments. So there's a need for them, and there's certainly a want for them.
But those are the Americans.
In America.
Yeah, that's what I'm making the point. It's in America. It's one thing for a politician to give it to, let's say, Canada or give it to Mexico. He'll be viciously attacked for it. And I'll give you evidence of this. Right now, Republicans are basically attacking the COVID bill, saying it's Joe Biden's giveaway to progressives. It's not for America. It's not for infrastructure. No, it's a giveaway to progressives. It's that nonsense. The political casting is going to come out. They're giving away vaccines. We've had 500,000 deaths in America, and Shane Stranahan is giving a vaccine. It will be that dark language. It'll be you with a picture of yourself in gray with a picture. Yeah. All the entire works. That's my thought. Anyway, I could be wrong. But
I hear you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the way politics goes. The voice that you guys were listening to is Peter Oliver. Peter Oliver is the EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. And as you can tell, very affable, very great guest. You can follow him on Twitter at PeterG_Oliver_RT and catch his reporting weekly on RT International, and great reporting it is. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with The Wrap.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault lines.
And we are back, and we are taking your calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and myself, Shane Stranahan, and our phone lines are open. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, that is 202-521-1320. Special call out earlier on. Brave called in from Atlanta. We didn't have enough time to get to you about an hour ago at this point, Brave. If you want to call back, and we'll take your call straight up. Just throwing that in there as a sort of latent apology for that. But again, 202-521-1320. Jamarl, I'm not kidding. If the Germans don't want those vaccines, I'll take them. Forget Ghana. Just send them all to me.
I'll take
them. Put them all in my veins.
Listen, put it all in my veins.
It's true.
You know, the thing is, Joe Biden's biggest challenge, whether he realizes this or not, it's not COVID. It's the vaccine. Because Donald Trump is going to get hit with the COVID thing. All the deaths are going to be on him. They're going to say 500,000 deaths. That's going to be on Trump. Biden's thing is going to be, was I able to get this vaccine out to as many people as possible, as fast as possible, in order to mitigate it? And that's what he's going to be judged on, I think. If I was him, I would have all powers and due diligence in the world. I would have like a World War II style plan of trying to get that stuff out just to ensure that the population realizes Joe Biden, took Herculean efforts to ensure that this was out. Yeah, I mean, what's the negative? Even if you have to spend more money, even if companies came up with more capacity that they couldn't do anything with later on, so what? The objective is to get the thing out in the short term. You can deal with the secondary consequences later. That's my thinking anyway. I don't know if he's going to do that just because the numbers are going down, and so the ramping up thing may not necessarily, match out in that way. And also, they're probably going to find new and different ways in order to make the stuff better, faster. The Russian vaccine, Sputnik V, that thing, it doesn't need that cold storage. So they're going to come up with probably different ways in doing it where it increases the efficacy of it and also the lifetime storage of it. So it may be, you may not need that from Germany. That's all I'm saying. They may have to ramp up here. But yeah, like you said, I mean, there'll be a lot of people around the world that would take their vaccine if Germany doesn't want it. A lot.
Agreed. Yes, 100%. And just one quick comment on the cold storage thing. I've seen credible debate recently about how long the vaccines will last if they're not in cold storage, whether you can move that, whether they would work in a refrigerator instead of a freezer, for instance, with some of them, and whether they do only last hours after they're taken out of the freezer or if they'll last days or longer. It's, we're still pretty early in the process. So even with the vaccines we have now, they may look at those again. They may follow up with more studies and see how they work. But right now you're sort of doing, the most that you can to ensure their efficacy, but there's a chance that they would work, in which case we'll update. I want to come back to one of the first things you said when you were responding there, which is, Trump will be seen as responsible for this crisis. Biden will be seen as responsible for how he handles it. In a weird way, that pretty much exactly mirrors the transition in 2008 with Bush and the Great Recession and Obama taking over and trying to fix
Very
it.
True.
I'm guessing you see that mirroring too. And
true.
with Obama, a lot of people criticize the way he handled it. Admittedly, he reversed it laggingly, but he did it in the process by handing over billions of dollars to too big to fail hedge funds and other investment banks who didn't need the money necessarily. It could have faced the repercussions of their own unwise decisions and policies, but instead got money to bail them out. And for the most part, were bailed out successfully. Do you think is there a parallel to that part of it? What do you see the potential negative fallout from Biden's handling of this crisis being in the coming years? Now, that's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm curious, what do you see popping up potentially, Jamarl?
That's an interesting question. I mean, because for Obama was dealing with like Wall Street and stuff like that. And so if he's going to dump a ton of money into Wall Street, the public is going to have some feelings about him dumping a ton of money into Wall Street, especially if they tank the economy. Like if you think of the number of people who lost their house, if you think of the number of people who went belly up from the standpoint of not having income or losing their jobs, and all of that stuff was put at the doorstep of basically a bunch of people who were trying to make more money than they needed to make. And so you have, just this kind of instantiated fraud, and then you're backing up the people and throwing your body to protect the people who did this fraud. But this one is a little different. I mean, Joe Biden, there is no, outside of, let's say, dumping money to drug companies or dumping money to health insurance companies by having public options. Like, those things, in a sense, aren't necessarily that great. You're basically having all of these people, instead of having like a Medicare for all plan, where you decimate the insurance companies and you ensure that the money goes towards healthcare. Well, he's not going to do that. But I don't think the public sees that because that's just normal in the way that we operate. The healthcare thing is different. It's just, I think it's a fundamentally different issue. Joe Biden could credibly dump a ton of money into drug companies in order to get the drugs out, and it'll be accepted. I don't see that the parallel, I think, breaks down.
Would it be, though? Would it be? I mean, but I could see a lot of potential problems with that. If he gives a ton of money to pharmaceutical companies, you know that there's going to be some inefficiencies there. Yes. And so if he's dumping billions or tens or hundreds of billions of dollars into pharmaceutical companies, I could see a lot of people writing pieces on how those pharmaceutical companies funded his campaign and how there's potential for graft. And that's just one side of this. Yeah. That's not an exact analog to what we were talking about with the 2008-2009 transition and the aftermath of that stuff. But it's one. I guess my point is, Trump, you're right, Trump will be seen as responsible for starting this crisis. Biden's going to be held responsible for however he handles it, whether he succeeds, whether he fails. People are going to have a bunch of different opinions on that, but there will be fallout from it regardless. He's going to face a bunch of criticism from the right, either for overstepping or for not being efficient enough at stopping it, or if Fauci continues to recommend and public health officials continue to recommend that we wear masks into 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, I agree with you on that part. The 2022 stuff is insane. But that kind of gets to my point of saying, look, if you need to ramp up the vaccines, you better ramp up the vaccines. But you can't tell people that they're going to have a mask. Because, look, the problem is, if you start off where everybody in society is vulnerable, fair enough. Everybody's vulnerable. Everybody can catch it. Oh, I can catch it. Yeah, I want to stay home. You're 60, 70%. What happens when half of the public gets vaccinated? And then that pressure to stay at home on some level goes away, and it just adds to a certain degree of, I got the vaccine because I wanted to go out, I got the vaccine because I wanted to travel, I got the vaccine because I didn't want to wear this stupid mask, and now Fauci is telling me I have to wear this mask for a whole another year. It's that, and I don't think that flies. It's because the more people that get vaccinated, the more people who are going to feel like they are less vulnerable to this, in which case you're going to lose the cohesion of society that says, yeah, we'll stay in the house. And you're going to get people who are like, yeah, I don't want to stay in the house. And that number is going to increase every bit as much or insofar as people get infected or get inoculated. So, yeah, I think it's going to run into serious problems if Joe Biden is telling people to wear a mask or if Fauci is telling people to wear a mask going into 2022. That could be a problem, yes. I do see
I think the requirements will almost certainly fade. Very likely later this year, depending on how we got new strains circulating. We haven't really heard too much about those recently. Those could be increasing the numbers, but right now things seem to be on the downturn, and the vaccines will almost certainly help with that. So I think that the requirements that people wear masks are going to fade away. And if all it is a public health recommendation and a culture shift where people are more likely to wear masks on the other side of this crisis, in my opinion, that's not that big of a deal. But we'll see what happens. We're not out of this thing yet, for sure. We've got at least months more to go and potentially years. And another side of this, like people have been saying, COVID is not going to go away magically. This will be an ongoing disease that public health officials and the public in general will have to mitigate in cold and flu seasons and throughout the year going forward into perpetuity until and unless we figure out some way to actually permanently immunize people against it. But it's going to be a thing that comes back. And that's another side of this.
That's unfortunate. Because I don't know what that looks like in 5, 6, 7 years. Like, is it the same potency? Has it degraded in regards to its effect on human beings? Like, I don't know what that looks like, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, we don't need another infectious disease, exactly. And I don't want to make a too heavy-handed an analogy to the flu, because if you do that, then the COVID is worse than the flu. It's not the same thing at all. But with the flu, you have new flu strains popping up every couple of years that cause major health crises and kill a lot of people. And the assumption can only be on my end that a similar phenomenon is going to happen with COVID, where even if it's persistent, even if for the most part it dies down, you're going to have new strains that pop up occasionally, and those are going to be crises that we're going to have to deal with in the future. And we're all going to have to deal with it. And the legacy of that will not just be on Trump, but on Biden too.
I agree with that.
Anyway.
I mean, but again, it depends on how Biden handles it. Like, I think Biden is going to get a large bit of leeway, at least in the beginning. But that leeway is going to go away every bit as much as it did for Obama after a while. So we'll see.
We got to close it out for today, folks. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to all of our guests. Great conversations this morning. Thank you to our callers in the last hour. Thank you, Engineer Andre, and producers Cam and Raheem, and our new producer. We will be pitching this coming week. We'll be talking more about her soon. And thank you again for listening to the show. We'll be back tomorrow, folks, with our last day of the week. Have a great day. See you again on the other side.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record books. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I got to be honest, feels like I'm dragging ass this morning. I read about Robert Kennedy Jr. speaks. The two of you will be waving their Trump monster voodoo. What? That is for 4 more years. I don't know if I don't think, look, I never fell into the Trump deranged category. If Trump did some good, I gave him credit for it. If he did some bad, I gave him, hit him for it. Shane doesn't see the impeachment in the way I see it. And so, I don't think you'll be getting the 4 years of Trump stuff. More so on Democratic channels, but not necessarily here. Did Shane stop shaving? He might have. I think he has his COVID beard, just like all of us do. Let's see. Yeah, he has a COVID beard. He's rocking the COVID beard. Yeah, build a beard. Yeah, it's a manly beard. It's a good manly beard. All right. I'm gonna say like. I'm gonna say share. I'm gonna say subscribe, and I will see you guys a little bit later today. I think I'm gonna have a few shows on, so I'll see you guys soon.